The Prime Minister and President Biden hold critical talks after a missile strikes NATO territory.
Very good morning to you. It's 6 o'clock on Wednesday, the 16th of November. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and Paul Hawkins. Your top story this morning.
World leaders have held emergency talks in Bali amid rising global tensions after a missile landed in Poland, killing 2 people. Reports suggest the missile was fired by Ukraine at an incoming Russian strike.
Also this morning,
I'm tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Donald Trump saying he wants to run again in 2024 for the White House. In a speech he made overnight, he said he wants to make America great and glorious again.
And Rishi Sunak has urged officials with concerns about the behaviour of Dominic Raab to come forward. It follows a series of bullying accusations against the Deputy Prime Minister.
So much to talk about this morning. Do get involved in the conversations. GB Views at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GB News.
So our top story this morning, and a fast-paced moving story, because President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak have literally just finished holding crucial one-on-one talks in Bali amid rising tensions between the West and Russia.
It comes after a missile landed on a farm in Freeview in Poland, killing 2 people.
While speaking this morning after a meeting of G7 and NATO leaders, President Biden was asked whether the weapons were fired from Russia.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia, but we'll see.
Well, this comes after Russia launched one of the biggest bombardments of Ukraine since the start of the war, with President Zelensky saying 85 missiles had been launched at his country.
Joining us now is the defence editor of the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Morning to you, Robert. First of all, your reaction to this missile strike and your first thoughts.
Well, it was a huge missile strike. As you said, Zelensky at first claimed that it was the biggest on infrastructure. 17 different districts, 2 big cities, including Kiev and Lviv. But as you say, the headlines have been captured by the speculation about what caused the explosion. It was some kind of missile, apparently, that killed 2 men at a grain station, a grain loading and processing and storage station, about 4 kilometres, just shy of 2 miles inside the Polish border. The speculation is that it was probably an anti-missile missile fired by Ukraine. That is speculation, and that's where we have to leave it. But that's where it is left at the moment, while there are ongoing investigations. But the implication is, of course, that the war has come into a full NATO partner country, Poland.
And the implications of that are absolutely huge, because, as we know, when one NATO country is attacked, whether it's deliberately or not, it has implications for all of NATO, and how NATO responds to this will be watched with a very close eye, of course, by the Kremlin.
Yes, the Kremlin has put out a series of denials and said that this was not a Russian missile. The missile, as far as they could tell, was not of Russian origins. And so far, the speculation and the doubts raised by President Biden seem to support that. But the fact is that this fire and counterfire, the incoming missile, probably heading somewhere west of Lviv even, one of the great western cities of Ukraine, makes this problematic. It does show where the war is going. It's not dying down, although we've had a big Russian retreat. And as we have heard from the G20 summit, where Sunak and Biden had just been speaking before Biden spoke about the missile attack. I understand from sources there that so much of the discussion has been polluted by the Ukrainian war, the Ukraine-Russia war. It's not a regional fight between Kiev and Moscow. It really does have very widespread international ramifications, not only in food and fuel, but the way that it's changing alliances, because Russia still does have some support, but quite strong support in Africa and in parts of Asia too.
I mean, earlier in April, I was along that border between Poland and Ukraine, and if we can just get the map back up now, we can see there, that's where the missile strike was. Just explain for viewers and listeners just how tense that region is along that border between Belarus, Poland and Ukraine, and the amount of exercises that NATO undertakes along that border and how they will have gamed out this scenario.
Yes, indeed. And further south with the Romania-Ukraine border, where America has put in elements of the Crack 101 Screaming Eagles air assault division. You're absolutely right. The reason why it's tense, and you will have felt tense, is just the range of these missiles. Probably the missiles that were coming into Lviv, which we can see in the middle of the map, were fired from way back in Russia. Some may even have been air-launched from bombers flying over the Caspian Sea. And this is what makes it very difficult. It is a war of precision weapons, but when precision weapons become unprecise, then you really are under threat. And we know, we've had from defense briefings, that Russia is running out of its own precision weapons and is now seeking medium long-range missiles from Iran.
OK, Robert Fox, really interesting to get your analysis on this fast-moving story. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I know it's a very busy time for you at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get some more reaction to all of this from the G20. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is there in Bali. And look, the G20 is absolutely pivotal in everything that has happened here, because these missile strikes that were sort of being scattergunned across from Russia into Ukraine yesterday followed immediately after President Zelensky was speaking. But whether or not this was a missile that was trying to defend against a missile remains to be seen. The fact is the G20 are all there and will come together and coalesce to discuss this very strongly.
Yeah, indeed, but actually separately, while you guys were sleeping overnight this morning here in Bali, the G7 leaders met to discuss this in an emergency form. The G7, of course, is actually a much smaller group of countries. It includes the United States, the UK, most of the Western alliance in terms of European countries, so France and Germany, for example, Italy and Spain as well as the European Union. As I say, alongside the Canadian President Justin Trudeau, to discuss that missile attack. Now, as you have been reporting over the last couple of minutes or so, the word here from Bali, from President Biden and from US officials seems to suggest that this missile did not come from Russia, potentially from inside Ukraine itself, hitting the Polish border. But yes, there's been unsurprising condemnation of what has gone on. We've just heard in the last couple of minutes from the meeting that's taken place between the US President and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, for the first time, in which they talked about the barbaric acts that have been taking place. President Biden said at the moment, where world leaders are meeting here in Bali, Putin is striking targets, civilian targets, children and women. I mean, it's almost, in my words, not your words, barbaric. And we know that Rishi Sunak is going to hold a press conference in the next couple of hours, and I suspect we'll hear pretty similar language. The big problem, of course, for leaders is how far do they go? What do they do next, given the sanctions that are already in place, given the military aid that is already in place to Ukraine? So all that is happening, and it has slightly changed the agenda, unsurprisingly, here at the G20. Meetings have been cancelled and changed and chopped around so that leaders have had the ability to discuss what has happened on the Ukrainian-Polish border. But there is another notable meeting due to happen in the next hour or so, Isabel, and that's between Xi Jinping and Rishi Sunak. It's the first meeting between a British Prime Minister and the Chinese Premier in 5 years, and we're expecting Rishi Sunak to call for a frank and constructive relationship with the Chinese. He says that China has fundamentally got different values to ours, but they want to coordinate on some of the world's big issues, that where there is common ground, they will come together. Now, there's been some criticism back home about whether Rishi Sunak is softening the language in regards to China, about how far he's going to go in bringing up some human rights abuses. Downing Street trying to claim that he will bring those up, but what they want is a constructive relationship where it can happen, but they're also clear that China remains a challenge and a threat.
Darren, thank you for that. We'll keep you across events here at the G20 throughout the morning here on Breakfast. We'll also take that speech from Rishi Sunak at just after 8 o'clock, making a speech at the G20, so we will bring that to you live. Here in the UK, the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, meanwhile, will face Angela Rayner at PMQs at midday today.
Yeah, this follows allegations of bullying and abrasive behaviour against Raab. Let's go to the Deputy Digital Political Editor, the Daily Express, Dan Falvey. Welcome to the programme. Lots to talk about this morning. Bullying allegations this time against the Deputy Prime Minister, and yet he's going to be at the dispatch box at lunchtime.
Yeah, it makes uncomfortable timing for the whole Conservative Party. I mean, let's face it, since Rishi Sunak's come in, there were allegations against Suella Braverman, there was Gavin Williamson, we're now on to Dominic Raab. It's just one after the other. And unfortunate timing is that, as you say, Dominic Raab is going to be in the House answering questions, and you can bet that at PMQs there's going to be a lot of time spent on Dominic Raab himself rather than on government policy. It's going to be about the personality.
Yeah, this is The Guardian saying it's spoken to multiple sources who claimed he'd created a culture of fear at the Ministry of Justice when he was Justice Secretary, and the allegations are that he was demeaning and very rude and aggressive with civil servants. There's a lot of ammunition there for Labour, but do you think PMQs may be overtaken by events in Poland as well? That may eat up some of that time.
I think what we'll see at the start of PMQs is Dominic Raab will make a short statement making quite clear just how strongly the government condemns what Vladimir Putin is doing, this latest range of missile attacks. I think then we'll see Angela Rayner say the same and Labour saying, we absolutely agree and this is awful. And then I think we'll get back to politics as normal. I don't think we're going to see the 6 questions of the sparring between them dominated by Russia. I think we'll see it very quickly, and they'll tick it off their list at the start, and then they'll go back to just, the Punch and Judy show that we're used to.
Yeah. What about China in all of this? Because just within the Conservative Party, not even from the Labour Party at this stage, there are criticisms of the softening of the language from Prime Minister Sunak towards China. He's got that bilateral with Xi Jinping at the G20. This is a big deviation from both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and an apparent bid to try and improve relations, because Sunak's saying you really can't solve any of the problems without Beijing on board.
It's also a big deviation from the language that Rishi Sunak gave during the summer leadership election. During the summer leadership election, Rishi Sunak was describing China as the biggest threat that the UK faces. And now suddenly we're having this bilateral meeting, which, as Dan McCarthy said today, this is the first one in half a decade. And we're talking about that softening of the language, and he's talking about, the need to work with them. That's very uncomfortable for Conservative backbenchers, particularly people like Ian Duncan-Smith, who, currently there are China's censored him. They've said that, he can't enter the country, for example. So for him, this is insanity as far as he's concerned. I think as far as Rishi Sunak's concerned, when you look at what's going on in Ukraine and the fact that Russia and China are close allies, that this is a partner who is necessary to work with. The UK has to work with China to try and rein Russia in. And I think we've seen that Xi Jinping hasn't been supportive of Vladimir Putin. In fact, he's been rather critical in the last couple of days. And I think Rishi Sunak thinks, yes, we need to be careful with China, but given everything that's going on around the world right now, we need to work with them.
Dan, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. Dan Farrelly there from the Daily Express. It is 6:14. Let's bring you up to date with the morning's other top stories.
NHS England is urging GPs to order more cancer scans in a bid to speed up diagnoses for thousands of people. At present, those with vague symptoms such as coughs and fatigue can face long waits to get treatment. Under new guidance, doctors can order more ultrasounds and CT scans, testing patient symptoms sooner and skipping the need to see a specialist first.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is facing questions over the resignation of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. This comes as a report found that Dame Cressida Dick felt intimidated into leaving her job and that due process was not followed before her departure.
A crew is working on a fuel line leak on the Artemis 1 rocket, but NASA's still hoping to launch the Artemis moon mission this morning. It follows a series of failed attempts earlier this year. Now, after the break, amid the ongoing cost of living crisis, we'll be hearing from a diabetic who says he owes his life to food banks. But first of all, here's your forecast.
Hello, good morning. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A brighter start for many of us compared with yesterday morning. Some sunshine out there, but further showers are pushing in from the south and the west, and there'll be a more prolonged spell of rain, along with strengthening winds later. This feature running in from the southwest is on its way. Ahead of that, it's a case of sunshine and showers for many. The showers mostly affecting southern and western coasts first thing. Quite frequent actually along the south coast of England where there's a gusty breeze. But inland, especially across central and eastern parts of the country, decent spells of sunshine through the morning and mostly dry as well. That is except for the Northern Isles where it stays wet and windy. Gales or even severe gale force winds, with those winds peaking later in the day. Now, later on, there will be some wet weather arriving, but ahead of that, temperatures reaching 10 to 14 Celsius. But it's by the end of the afternoon that southwest England and then into South Wales, the heavy rain moves through. This rain will last for a few hours. It will push into southeast England with some intense downpours here, and we've seen some wet weather here recently, so a rain warning in force because it could cause issues overnight. It'll be accompanied by a strong wind, that wind gusty and leading to gales around coasts, but all in all, it's a blustery night for many. The rain pushes north, followed by showers, and so for most, it is a damp and breezy start to Thursday. That is except for the far west of Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we see some early sunshine, perhaps a few mist patches as well. And actually, Northern Ireland, once again, the place to be with plenty of sunshine through the day. Southwest England sees sunny skies reappear as well.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamonn Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back at 6:19. Still to come on the programme this morning.
At 6:45, we'll get a tour of the Arctic research vessel, originally dubbed Boaty McBoatface, now named after Sir David Attenborough, as it prepares to depart for the Antarctic.
At 7:15, we'll ask a Democratic strategist about Trump launching his run for president in 2024 and what they'll do to fight back. We're also hoping in the next few moments to speak to a staunch Trump supporter as well.
Yep, you can get in touch with us via all the usual ways this morning. GB Views at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GB News.
Now, while we work to establish connections to the States to speak to that Trump supporter, we're going to talk about and focus on some domestic issues in the meantime, because the Chancellor, of course, is preparing to make his long-awaited autumn statement tomorrow and has promised to protect the most vulnerable.
An increasing number of families are finding themselves unable to afford necessities due to the cost of living crisis. One of the biggest issues is the price of food, and it's causing food banks to struggle.
Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has the story.
As winter looms, the choice between heating and eating is becoming even more difficult. As prices rise, so does the number of people becoming ever more reliant on food banks.
If I take anything, I don't take more than one. I always say, leave one for the next person. I can manage with one, or I'll make myself manage with one thing.
At a food bank in Manchester, I met Dean. He's a diabetic, and he told me that without the support he's received, there's a good chance he'd be dead. Tell me about how you first came to be using a food bank.
I first came to use a food bank when I lost my job. I lost my job as an engineer, and I had no money. I was using the job centre, and they knocked me down to about £200 and odd a month, and I couldn't afford food in certain parts of the month.
Dean is not alone. Over the last 5 years, the need for food banks has increased by a massive 81%. For some, it's the only choice they have.
I'm here at FareShare Greater Manchester, a charity that helps over 50,000 people every year. Now, given the cost of living crisis, the work they're doing here is so vital, and the amount of production that goes into it is massive. We're just about to go on one of the many deliveries that they do here every single day.
Thank you.
A short drive away, we arrive at the so-called social supermarket, where for just £4, local residents can buy a week's worth of food.
How important is the social supermarket, especially now given the cost of living crisis when people are struggling to feed their families?
Yeah, so we've seen quite an increase. The kind of graph has been going up this way. It's such a worry for people to pay the bills. And we've had people that before the cost of living crisis were just about managing to hold on and pay their bills.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing completely different, is that of course those very vulnerable families are still vulnerable, but we're seeing families coming that are in full-time employment and still they can't pay their bills.
This social supermarket is just one of over 200 places supported by FareShare Greater Manchester. Back at the depot, volunteers are still working tirelessly to support as many people as possible.
We give out to charities and pantries, people who can't afford food. We get a lot of collections that come in, and we distribute it out to people that have got no money basically and they can't afford anything.
Launched in 2008, the aim of FareShare is twofold: to combat food poverty and to combat food waste in and around Manchester.
If we didn't have FareShare, there'd be a lot of hungry people out there. The way the world's going now, there's going to be a lot of people that is going to be in this situation where they can't afford food.
People up and down the UK are facing starvation this winter, and the number of food banks continues to rise. The question now, what more can be done to help those who are struggling most? Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Yeah, difficult times. It's 6:24. Donald Trump has announced that he is running for president in 2024.
Yeah, in his much-anticipated speech, he promised to tackle the ongoing economic crisis and to stop illegal immigration. Let's take a look at his big announcement.
America's golden age is just ahead, and together We will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. We will make America glorious again. And we will make America great again. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Thank you.
Well, joining us now is political advisor for Look Ahead America and a former Trump campaign staffer, Matt Brainard. Morning to you, Matt. Thanks for joining us, especially given the time where you are. First of all, I guess you're quite excited about Donald Trump running for president again.
I think I'm excited, but I think I'm not nearly as excited as the media is. It's a huge story here. It's a huge story all over the world. And if you look back at what happened in 2016, that's kind of the reason why he was so successful, is that most other candidates, they have to spend a lot of money to buy the amount of airtime that news media is giving him for free. They covered his entire speech end to end, even on stations that really are adversarial to him, like CNN and MSNBC. They gave him a bunch of free airtime. So I think nobody's really more excited about this than the media, because it really drives their ratings, and that's what they charge ads on the basis of.
It's interesting because there was lots of speculation about whether or not he might retract his plan to announce his candidacy after not doing so well, not just the Republicans, but the candidates that he endorsed, not least his acolyte, Carrie Laken, who was much expected to be his running mate. And we've now seen Rupert Murdoch withdrawing support for him. We've seen Fox News pulling away from his speech that was broadcast live on their channel last night. He's not going to make it, is he?
I think it's a little troubling, though, just what you've said, at least to me as an American. I don't know how things are over in the UK, where media oligarchs and giant international global companies get to decide who our nominee for president is, or who our president is.
The midterms last week that these
President Trump
positions have been taken.
I think it's a very scary thing to have to hear. And this is a battle. This nomination is going to be decided not by the media or pundits, but in the battlegrounds of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and the other states across the country, not by pundits or by media oligarchs like, Rupert Murdoch.
With respect, the Club for Growth, which is an influential group of Conservative donors, have already come out and proved that the polling for DeSantis is doing much better in many of the states that you just mentioned. It's the Republicans, not just media gurus and whoever else you might want to attribute it to.
We are going to have a hard-fought primary, and I think it's very important that Donald Trump has decided to run, because it's going to determine who's going to be the voice of the Republican Party in the future. So either it's going to be Donald Trump, or it's going to be somebody that's going to defeat Donald Trump. And I can tell you that by having a robust, energetic primary with different ideas and different candidates, that's going to prepare whoever our candidate is to be very strong going into the general. I am certain of two things. Number one is that we have a deep bench of very good candidates from the governor of Iowa, from the governor of Virginia and Florida, and former President Donald Trump. The second thing I'm confident of is that in Minneapolis, in the summer of 2024, whoever wins, we're all going to join hands and stand shoulder to shoulder and march to victory in November.
So you're saying that if Donald Trump doesn't get the Republican ticket to run for president, he will happily step aside and go, for example, if Ron DeSantis gets the ticket, Ron, great, I'm behind you, let's go for it. You really think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I'm completely confident of it. And like I said, we're all better off by having a robust primary. And we do need to definitively decide who the leader of the party is, because whenever a party is in this vacuum where they're out of power, it's really unsure and unclear who the leader is. And we have this former president who many of his supporters, many Republicans believe, kind of got an unfair shake in 2020 with the media suppressing stories about Hunter Biden, tech oligarchs investing money in Democrat-heavy areas while not investing money in the election systems in Republican-heavy areas, other ways that the election appears to be rigged, who think he deserves a second chance. There are other people in the party who are like, yeah, let's get a fresh face in here. We're all going to have a long discussion. We're a big family here. And the one thing I'm sure of is we're going to march towards victory together out of the Minneapolis convention in 2024 to victory in November.
So how do you explain the midterm election results then, where 22 losses for the Republicans in key Senate battlegrounds, occurred, with candidates that were backed by Donald Trump?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. If you're a critic of Donald Trump, you'll say that he was a curse on these candidates. He shouldn't have gotten involved. He pushed candidates forward who wouldn't have survived other way. If you looked at it from somebody who's an advocate for Donald Trump, you probably say, well, the problem is that he wasn't on the ballot. Because when he was on the ballot in 2020, even though he lost, we picked up a bunch of House seats and we did very well in Senate races. So his argument would be, look, for the Republican Party to win, I need to be on the ballot, which is a compelling argument in itself. But, there's two ways you can see that. Maybe he's a curse, but maybe he needs to be on the ballot for us to be really successful.
Is that the only...
Just in fairness, though, there were a lot of candidates he did endorse that did win. It's not a majority of the ones he endorsed did, in fact, win last Tuesday.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say, when it comes to the way you view that, is it really just a prism between the two, whether it's a curse or to do with the fact that his name wasn't on there? Or was it actually to do with most of the candidates that he endorsed actually claimed electoral fraud, which after going through the courts, numerous audits, has been rejected effectively at the ballot box by Americans? They don't like that argument, which was again repeated at Mar-a-Lago by President Trump last night.
Well, it depends on what you consider. I mean, the fact is that the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop and all the evidence connecting his father to foreign transactions was suppressed by tech oligarchs and other media who said it was fake news, who said it was a Russian intelligence operation. Now we know it was all completely true and it was all authentic. We had Mark Zuckerberg investing in Democrat areas election systems like Fulton County in Georgia, which is heavily Democrat, and not investing in any of the many red counties surrounding it, which did have an impact on the election outcome. And a lot of people think that's not fair. And now that has actually been made illegal in many states. So you can make a very compelling argument in facts that the election was rigged against him. Now, some people disbelieve it, whatever, but one thing I can tell you is that the election in 2024 is not going to be about issues like that. It's really going to be about the same thing your earlier segment was on, about people relying on food banks in the UK because of inflation and other problems. We have the problems just as bad here in the US, and there's only one person to blame, the guy in charge, Joe Biden and his administration. And it's going to be a choice between his vision and continuing on the path we've been for the last 2 years, or a Republican alternative, whoever our nominee happens to be. DeSantis, Youngkin, Trump, any one of these guys would be a fantastic candidate to take our country back in the right direction.
Matt, we really appreciate you talking to us this morning. We know it's stupid o'clock in the morning where you are, so thank you. Thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, listen, do let us know your views as you watch those interviews or any of the topics we've been discussing this morning. Get in touch in the usual ways. And after the break, we will be looking through the papers, a lot of them, quite frankly, out of date because it's been such a fast night for news. But we will have a little look at what they're talking about and bring you right up to date on everything with David Mellor and Tessie Ojo after this.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversation. We are here for you on radio, television, and online across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 6:34. Good to have you with us this morning. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening.
Donald Trump has announced he's running to be US president again. The billionaire's aides have filed paperwork for his 2024 White House bid as the former president launched his intention to regain the title.
We always have known that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream. And it's a word you don't use. 2 words. I don't want to be Joe. It's 2 words, American dream. That was not good what he did. There are a lot of bad things, like going to Idaho and saying, welcome to the state of Florida. I really love it. In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
The current US President Joe Biden says it's unlikely Russia fired the missile that killed 2 people in Poland yesterday. Mr. Biden's statement was later backed up by US intelligence, suggesting the missile was fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian one. Well, the Prime Minister met with G7 and NATO leaders in response to the incident, saying the UK will support our allies.
Dominic Raab is expected to face fresh questions over his conduct towards junior colleagues at Prime Minister's Questions today when he stands in for Rishi Sunak, who's at the G20. The Deputy Prime Minister is facing a series of allegations he bullied officials as well as being rude and demeaning.
Now it's time to go through the papers. Joining us this morning is former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor, and CEO of the Diana Awards, Tessie Ojo at CBE. Good morning to you both. Look, it's that classic time when the papers, I feel quite sorry for them, because obviously this story in Poland broke quite late for them, and it's quite significantly been updated over the course of the night, not least with President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak meeting in the last hour or so. But David, the Times front page have it as Russians being blamed for that fatal strike on Poland. It's more nuanced than that, from what we understand now.
I mean, where this the boundary between Poland and Ukraine, this place where unfortunately these 2 people were killed by a missile, is just a couple of miles across the border. The issue is whether the Russians actually launched the missile, which then didn't hit Ukraine but hit Poland, or whether this was part of a defensive effort by the Ukrainians. It's very difficult, I think, under those circumstances to prevent cross-border incursions of that kind. I imagine that they will want, if they possibly can, not to have to blame Russia, because, of course, it does take it a lot further in terms of escalation, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and therefore Russia can attack Ukraine without automatically triggering a response from other NATO countries. If there was an attack on Poland, then all of the other NATO countries would be expected to rally round, and that would obviously make things a lot more difficult, even than they are at the moment.
Yeah, Tessie, it is daylight now in Poland, and they'll be able to uncover a lot more from the site and more evidence and kind of piece together what happened.
Yeah, I mean, this is just this ongoing tragedy that just not ending. We're almost 10 months in or 9 months in, and my heart really goes out to the everyday person. Ultimately, there are people who are just trying to get by. Yeah. I can imagine in our society today, if this happened, these are just ordinary people trying to survive. Yeah. And we have this war that's just not stopping. And whichever way we look at it, whoever's out there this is human tragedy that's happening right now.
Particularly the 2 people killed by the missile, who were not in Ukraine, right?
Absolutely.
They would have thought they were safe.
Absolutely. It's like just going about your normal business and stuff happens. And
what's interesting in all this, though, David, is, of course, not just Putin, but of course the entire Kremlin will be looking very closely at how the West, how NATO responds to this. Because if they are able to accidentally fire into neighbouring countries with impunity, there's no doubt they will do that again.
Oh, yes, I'm quite certain of that. I think the tragedy of all of this, first of all, we have to see it in individual terms. The thousands of people who are not combatants, children, families who've lost their lives. And secondly, the complete abdication of any attempt to treat these incidents as war crimes. I mean, there was a clear distinction which operated fairly effectively during the Second World War and thereafter, where a distinction was drawn between people who were fighting people and people who were just innocent civilians caught up in it. I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, the United Nations, one longs to love the United Nations. But, you know, Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations. Russia can veto anything it doesn't like at the UN, and yet Russia can get away with these terrible, terrible things. But, of course, the only good news, but of course the Ukrainians bear the brunt of this, is that Russia thought that Ukraine would be easy meat, and of course it hasn't been.
No.
I think what's really interesting is that you could argue the G20 triggered these missile attacks yesterday, and yet the fact that all of these key world leaders are in one place will actually help to act very decisively in responding to it all. A first meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak in the last hour. Really interesting shifting in sort of relations there, I suspect, don't you, under a more sort of centre ground Prime Minister from the Conservatives compared to the last two?
I mean, one hopes that... I mean, Sunak, I think, is impressive in terms of the way he presents himself. I mean, Liz Truss was always, I hate to use the word, a bit manic. Boris was Boris, and Boris being Boris wasn't always what was... Although, to be fair to Boris, he was very strong on Ukraine, and in fact, I think he dragged the Germans and the French along behind him. So I think if Boris wants to have a finest hour, he'd find it in what happened in
Part of
Ukraine.
Boris' popular appeal, though, is that he wasn't polished like Sunak.
Yes.
And so he had that connection with voters that Sunak may find harder to establish.
Yes, and I think what we need to know is, does... well, I mean, this is the next thing I'll be discussing. Obviously, there are other things we'll be discussing. Is Sunak's polish an indication of his depth as a person, or is Sunak's polish disguises the fact that he is falling into all the same old traps that his predecessor did? This is when we will arrive at some point during the next 3 hours on the subject of Mr. Robb, not a favourite person.
We'll be talking about that this morning.
But I'll save that up.
OK.
Yeah.
This is just a trailer.
Thanks for that teaser. Speaking of teasers, Rishi Sunak will be speaking at 8 o'clock from the G20. We'll bring you that, and we're also going to bring you shortly a live shot from that scene of the missile strike in Poland, in Prevodov. So we'll bring you that shortly, live pictures from there. Listen, in fact, we can bring you... And there it is. You can't really see much of the blast area there. It's a van.
But as you were saying, daylight, which is absolutely key, because all of this happening about 3 o'clock yesterday, there wasn't an awful local time. There wasn't an awful lot of daylight left in which to carry out those investigations, and the West very much taking their time to draw any conclusions about not only where the missile was launched from, but whose missile it was. So those investigations, as you can see, will be underway now. And you were talking about the absolutely strategic location of Prevodov, that is in between Belarus, Ukraine and Poland, right, very much on the border of three countries.
Well, yeah, it's about an hour and a half's drive where that missile hit from Holmes, which is where we were in April. There's the map. So you can see the missile strike there. It's very close to Lviv, on the other side of the border, just if you look southeast towards Ukraine, but very close to that border with Belarus. And we travelled along that border between those three countries, and you could feel the tension. This was just after the war had broken out. We were heading through a little village right near the border in the forest in the middle of the night. We were stopped by police at a checkpoint. We were asked to check our documentation. They were worried about people crossing over from Belarus into Poland, which is, of course, a NATO country. And there were NATO exercises ongoing. You would see troops being driven around the border and weapons. So really tense part of the world, that. And that is why something like what has happened overnight would really, really get people's backs up.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to keep our eyes on Prevodov throughout the course of the morning and pop back to Bali as well with Sunak making that speech. But let's look at the papers then, Tessie, again. You've chosen the front page of the Express for this story, which, well, really tragic. 2-year-old boy dying from mould in Britain. And their headline, it shames the UK.
I mean, I have no words, really. I think this story is about 2-year-old Awab who died of a respiratory condition that's caused by mold in his family home. What's really tragic about this is the number of times his parents complained and the fact that actually they weren't listened to, nothing happened. And there's just this sense of, I know this is one of thousands of cases, but it's shameful that in 21st century Britain that we would have a child who dies from mould.
Mould, yes.
It's a Victorian sort of story, this. As you say, it sort of harks back to a time when we were sort of with awful conditions in this country, and there will be lots of questions about how this was able to happen and a lot of pressure put on it, and also claims of racism in all of this.
Absolutely. This is something that points to the voice of the voiceless, people who do not have a voice, people who would complain. And I see this across in my field, where children, depending on who you are, what your background is or what you sound like, that really determines the trajectory of your life. And to see this played out, where this young boy's life has just been cut short because his family were voiceless.
Yeah.
Where really nobody, really.
Yeah. But I think we hope, I mean, it's tragic, a terrible thing, a 2-year-old to die like that. I guess what we have to hope is that he in death will become a focus of concern that will allow a whole lot of evidence to come out about the awful conditions in which some families have to live, and focus on the need to ensure our housing stock is kept fit for human habitation.
Well, Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, said it beggars belief that Rochdale Borough Council's chief executive hasn't lost their job. Do you think he should?
Well, I mean, scapegoating people is, a favourite thing. But I think Rochdale need to hang their heads in shame. Whether the head of Rochdale Council needs to fall on this sword, I don't know. I don't know the man. It may be that he's totally blameless in this. But one thing is absolutely certain. Local authorities have got to get a grip of decaying housing stock where such a thing can happen.
Yeah. I just think there needs to be more accountability in terms of housing. Did we not see when Grenfell happened, we thought we learned lessons? How did we how did we build homes that were not fit for purpose? How do we put people, real life people, in homes that are not fit for purpose? And I think there needs to be greater accountability around housing.
Well, this is with Grenfell, which, sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, David.
My son has a flat just a few hundred yards away from Grenfell, so I'm afraid his window gave him a very vivid picture of it. And what he couldn't understand was the speed with which it all happened. And we now know that was because a whole lot of cladding was not fit for purpose. In fact, was actually actively promoting the fire and the devastation that happened, outrageous.
Yeah.
Right, I just want to flag that we are going to go now live to the Artemis launch. We're expecting it to take off in about 5 seconds' time. Let's have a listen in.
3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
So there you go. That is the most powerful rocket ship in history, the Artemis 1, which has in recent months been beset with technical issues and most recently bad weather, stopping that launch. But that has successfully taken place, as you can see in the last 30 seconds or so from Cape Canaveral. And they'll be very pleased about that, because although there are no humans on board that rocket, it is paving the way to a manned or indeed perhaps a female space visit to the moon in around 4 years' time. Nobody has been on the moon since 1972.
And making a notable contribution to global warming.
Yes, well, this is true, but you never know, it could provide alternatives.
And actually, that brings us to the Mail Online, David,
Yes.
and Trump's run for the presidency again in 2024, which he announced overnight, make America great and glorious again. One of the things he wants to do is send men to Mars. I don't think that'll put him in the White House.
Well, he might be the first one to pioneer this. It would be good.
Right, OK.
I mean, look, just to be serious about Donald Trump, he's utterly shameless. A lot of what he's said are things that he could have done when he was president, except he wasted his time doing lots of other things, including a lot of time doing nothing but make empty speeches. I can't
Some might say Joe Biden's the same.
Yes, I think a lot of them are the same. Well, it is the paradox, isn't it? America's a great nation, innovative and inventive in so many things. How do they end up with a man like Trump and a clapped-out fellow like Biden? I mean,
Well, they might say the same about the UK going...
Well, not attractive.
Well, they might say the same about the
career.
UK going through, 3 prime ministers in 3 months?
Oh, yeah, we've got names, but we're allowed to have a go at other people. I don't take upon myself defending Liz Truss, because, I mean, there are plenty of reasons why I wouldn't come on this, and defending Liz Truss would be one of them.
Yeah, I think it will certainly be interesting. I mean, there was speculation that he might not announce his candidacy following the failures of the Republicans, not only in the midterms, but of his endorsed candidates as well.
That's right, 14 of the 16 lost. But I tell you the other interesting thing. I mean, Mystic Mellor feels the prediction coming on. I think there's every prospect that Trump will be indicted for serious offences before the American presidential election, because the things that they are looking into are really, really serious.
Yeah. Yeah, he's facing a number of investigations. Says you, Trump?
No. I just don't think that our world could cope with another Trump. Just not, no. I just think that the last couple of years we've had, I mean, I wouldn't say stability because our world is completely messed up right now, but at least we didn't have that level of hate, that level of just, it was just too much. And I think that I don't think we could cope with that.
What does it say about American democracy that 4 years on you get the same choice again?
Well,
Biden against Trump.
I mean, not yet. That's him. You know, at this point, he's just declaring. That doesn't mean that I'm hoping that the people are...
That's true, but if he gets the
nomination... And we don't know it'll be Biden either.
Yeah, well,
2020.
I would have thought the midterm election result has reinforced...
Yeah, certainly, but it's not guaranteed.
For sure.
But, I mean, whether or not, you know, it is Trump or not, we're likely to see more Trump aping, don't you think, in other Republican candidates? Because his model of attacks and sort of whipping up crowds and the MAGA merch has been a successful route,
Yes, and I think also this business where, you know, America calls itself the world's greatest democracy. You can argue about that, but that's what they assert. And suddenly you find that a whole host of senior American politicians, led by Trump, do not accept the integrity of the whole system. This is a new development. You know, at least most time, but by the time the ballots were counted, that was it and all about it. Now, a lot of the Trump people are saying if he lost an election, well, he didn't really, because there was cheating on a grand scale. That's quite worrying.
And that's a really scary place to be. We are meant to be the developed world, and we have this level of doubt around our election process. That's terrible.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, although polling seems to indicate that that's not voters' primary concern, and that if they're going to be smart about it, they'll kind of bang on more about the economy heading towards...
And I think the other thing, you know, before we leave the great Donald, I'll take another blood pressure pill and carry on talking about him. The thing that was also awful was him effectively getting a bunch of his supporters to invade the Capitol.
Well, yeah, I mean, he denies that, of course. But there is an ongoing...
He wouldn't he? Yes.
Yeah, there is obviously those hearings, Capitol Hill hearings, an investigation into all of that. But, yeah, incredibly serious, as you say, allegations against him. Look, we have to leave the papers there. We will have more from both Tessie Ojo and David Mellor around the same time, just after 7:30.
Yeah, it is 6:53, so David Attenborough isn't just a famous broadcaster. It's now also the name of a polar research ship.
Yeah, the vessel was first named Boaty McBoatface, so you can see the significant upgrade there. After a public vote to name the ship went viral, but officials intervened to name it after Sir David Attenborough instead.
It is currently docked in Essex before departing for the Antarctic this week, where it will carry out scientific trials. Our national reporter Eddie Costello was on board.
She's one of the most famous ships in the world. Royal research ship Sir David Attenborough is set to transform the UK's polar research capacity. This Sunday, the 129-metre vessel will set sail for the Falkland Islands. That will take 3.5 weeks. From there, it will sail for another 4 days to Antarctica. Welcome to the science hangar, where all of the scientific equipment is deployed. And with all of the equipment, the ship weighs 15,000 tonnes. It can work for up to 60 days at sea without having to refuel, and 90 people can live and work on board. The ship is operated by the British Antarctic Survey and has been described as a floating laboratory. For the next 30 years, it will allow scientists to investigate important issues such as climate change and sea level rise. Kelly Hogan is a marine geophysicist who lives and works on board.
We are seeing much more big calving events where lots of ice is breaking off from the ice sheet, and that's stuff that we're actually witnessing with our own eyes when we're doing our research. That it's really real, and I think that's that can be a challenge, but it also brings home how important it is for us to be doing this kind of work.
How significant is the timing of this, with COP27 going on at the moment, world leaders meeting to discuss our climate and our environment, and the work that you do on the ground, and what this ship is doing this week?
Knowing how the climate crisis is affecting the whole planet, knowing that the younger generation is really interested in this topic, and they're the people that are going to inherit the planet. The good thing now is that we have the capability of the David Attenborough and the great science that it can do in one to go and study these places in more detail. We're at a sort of critical point in time where we're trying to understand the future of our ice sheets and the future of the sea level as it rises. And so having this capability now is really key to improving our understanding of those really critical processes.
The ship is manned by one of the youngest captains in history. Will Watley is just 33.
I mean, when we're on board, we quite often forget how famous the ship is. It's only when we actually go to places and we see all the pictures and the interest it generates. It reminds us how much interest there is in this ship, because throughout the build there's been such good coverage of it, and everyone's so interested in what this ship does and our mission.
Well, winter is really setting in here in the UK, but for crew and scientists on board this vessel, they're looking forward to heading to the coldest place on Earth, where their vital work will contribute to saving our planet. Ellie Costello, GB News.
It's absolutely spectacular, that, isn't it?
Yep, the good ship, Sir David Attenborough.
Yeah. Look, your views have been coming in thick and fast despite the early hour. Thank you so much for all of those. Barry, with thoughts on this missile strike, says, as Russia has become a rogue state but has a veto on the Security Council, it makes the UN useless. Should the UN be abandoned and restarted under another guise with no one having a veto? Interesting.
Yeah, but they'd have to vote on that and that would get vetoed by Russia. Paul says, I don't know why they are saying they don't know who fired the missiles into Poland. Since the invasion of Ukraine, the whole of that area has completely covered by satellites, so they do know who fired them and what they were firing at. They're just not telling us.
Well, they certainly want to be extremely cautious before drawing any conclusions. That's the impression I'm getting. Lots of thoughts about Trump's big news last night. Of course, he is running for 2024. Michael says, it is absolutely shameful to me that Donald Trump could again possibly run for the office of the President of the United States.
Yeah, but John says, I can't wait to see other world leaders' faces if Donald Trump gets back in. The left, Biden has opened the floodgates for migrants to enter America from the south. And once again, Britain's also flooded by migrants. The left always allows it. Trump gets back in. That might help the Tories because Trump won't be able to work with Sir Keir Starmer. Keep them coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk or at gbnews.
We'll be back in just a moment with all the latest on that evolving situation in Poland.
The Chancellor has a problem. He's got £55 billion to find, and it could soon become your problem too. Tax rises and cuts could be coming, but where will the axe fall? Benefits and pensions, support for energy bills, or social care? To find out what it means for you and your family, the Chancellor's autumn statement, live here on GB News tomorrow from 10 a.m.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden hold critical talks after a missile strikes NATO territory.
Good morning. Welcome to the show. It's 7:01. It's Wednesday, the 16th of November. You're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and Paul Hawkins.
Yeah, there is only one story this morning. World leaders holding emergency talks in Bali. This is at the G20 amid rising global tensions after a missile landed in Poland, killing 2 people. It follows one of the biggest bombardments of Ukraine by Russia since the start of the war.
Also this morning,
I'm tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Donald Trump there announcing his bid for the presidency in 2024, saying in a speech he wants to make America great and glorious again.
Rishi Sunak has urged officials with concerns about the behaviour of Dominic Raab to come forward. It follows a series of bullying accusations against the Deputy Prime Minister.
And in the last few minutes, the Artemis rocket has taken off from Cape Canaveral. The historic NASA mission aims to send people back to the moon for the first time in 50 years.
So many of you getting in touch with us this morning on Donald Trump, on the missile strike in Poland, and also, well, pretty much everything we're talking about, frankly. GBViews at gbnews.uk or at GB News if you want to get involved in the conversation.
Well, welcome to the show. It's been a busy news night. Our top story this morning, and President Biden and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak have held their first one-on-one talks in Bali after a missile landed on a farm in Prevadov in Poland, killing 2 civilians.
Yeah, speaking this morning after a meeting of G7 and NATO leaders, President Biden was asked whether the weapons were fired from Russia.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it is. It's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia, but we'll see.
Well, look, lots of work being done to establish exactly what happened in Prevadov, but this all comes after Russia launched one of the biggest bombardments of Ukraine since the start of the war, with President Zelensky saying 85 missiles had been launched at his country.
Well, elsewhere at the G20, Rishi Sunak will hold a last-minute bilateral meeting with China's Xi Jinping today. That's the first meeting of its kind in 5 years.
And the Prime Minister is also expected to hold one-on-one talks with President Biden amid ratcheting tensions with Russia. He'll also be giving a speech at around 8:30 our time this morning. Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in...
Well, given that missile attack on the Ukrainian-Polish border, G7 leaders actually met here in an emergency forum at the G20 this morning. That includes the US President Joe Biden, the Canadian Prime Minister, many European leaders, including Rishi Sunak, were there as well, discussing precisely what the response should be and what the intelligence is telling them about this missile strike. Now, we've heard from President Biden, US officials suggesting it was not an attack from Russia, that this missile may well have come from inside Ukraine. But clearly there is concern about this conflict spilling over, not least of all to another European NATO member. And we've heard also this morning from the Prime Minister and indeed from the US President, who have met here at the summit in Bali, in which they talked about how this was barbaric and all part of Putin's war that should come to an end. This is what Joe Biden said as the Prime Minister and him met. He said, at the moment we're seeing world leaders gather here in Bali, seeking progress on world peace. Meanwhile, Putin is striking civilian targets, children and women. I mean, it's almost, in your words, not mine, barbaric, says Joe Biden. So though the meeting here amongst the G20 has slightly got changed, there's been changes and meetings moved and cancelled because of what has happened on the Polish-Ukrainian border, and there will be wider concern beyond the G7 about what has happened. Clearly, Russia is suggesting that any reports that they were behind this missile attack are untrue. There is another meeting, though, happening here in Bali today of real significance in the Prime Minister's last day, and that is with the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. It's the first time the British Prime Minister, has met the Chinese Premier in 5 years, and we're expecting Rishi Sunak to call on a frank and constructive relationship with China during the meeting. He's going to talk about how China has got fundamentally different values from the UK, but they want to work together and coordinate on some of the big global challenges the world faces where there is common ground. Now, there has been some criticism back home about whether Rishi Sunak is going soft on China to a degree, whether the language is changing a little. Now, Downing Street have batted out of the way, saying that China remains a challenge and a threat to the United Kingdom, but it will be a very, very important meeting, not least of all because, as I say, it's the first time that there's been a meeting between a British Prime Minister and a Chinese Premier in 5 years. And then, after all that, the Prime Minister is going to leave Bali, where the weather has somewhat also changed, and head home for that really important autumn statement tomorrow.
Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey.
Now joining us is the former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannett. A very warm welcome back to the programme. Good to see you. I just want to ask you about the latest comments that we're just receiving from Downing Street. They have declined to comment on reports that this missile that hit Poland was fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian missile, saying the facts need to be established first. And that certainly seems to be very much the cautious approach of the West. But just how hard is it to establish the facts in all of this?
Well, it is hard to establish the facts, and that is why world leaders, quite rightly, are being cautious. What we absolutely need to avoid is this war escalating in any shape or form as a result of a miscalculation or a mistake. So the intention to be cautious, the intention to investigate thoroughly is absolutely right. That said, one's got to put this in the widest background. At the time of this strike, there was a major incoming Russian attack on Ukrainian infrastructure. So there were many Russian missiles incoming, if you like, to the west. There were also many Ukrainian anti-air missiles being fired. So there are several possibilities as to how this could have come about. Was it a Russian attack by mistake? Was it a deliberate Russian attack? Was it a Ukrainian counter weapon, if you like, an air defense weapon that itself went rogue? So there are many possibilities here, and I think world leaders are right, experts are right, to establish the facts to make sure that, for goodness sake, this war does not escalate as a result of miscalculation.
Wasn't this always inevitable, Lord Dannett, the longer the conflict went on, that something like this would happen, that the conflict would creep outside the borders of Ukraine?
Well, yes, you're right. It was always possible that that might happen, but I think one has to look at and also ask the question, why might something like this happen? And there's a very big difference between Russia deliberately attacking targets in Poland, and you could construct a rationale why they might do that. Most of the Western weapons that have come into Ukraine have come through Poland, so Russia could decide that they wanted to interrupt that supply line and make a deliberate attack. That would be a serious measure. That would be an attack on Poland. That would be under Article 5, an attack on all member states of NATO. Or alternatively, you've got the error theory that, just as we've seen yesterday, possibly a Russian missile that went rogue, possibly Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile that went rogue. So there are options whereby there could be a deliberate escalation by the Russians, or there are options whereby it could be a mistake. But in any event, Western leaders need to be very cautious, very careful, not to jump to conclusions and risk escalating the war by miscalculation.
Isn't there a danger, though, that in being extremely cautious and, understandably so, that actually they embolden Russia, that they will be watched so closely and will be seen to not be acting decisively and astutely in all of this, that they could be giving Russia licence to have accidental incursions into other neighbouring areas?
Yes, Isabel, of course, you're absolutely right. But again, this is where balance has to be struck. And decisions on balance can only be taken once the facts have been established. And it is really important to establish the facts. And technical experts today will be able to do that, to look at the trajectory, to look at where the impact was, look at what debris they can find, analyse who made it, and many other questions can be asked and hopefully answered during the course of today. Yes, and if it was proven that it was a deliberate Russian attack, then you're absolutely right. The West, NATO, has to make a decisive response. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a kinetic response. Under Article 4, there can be a request for urgent talks between Poland, the country that was attacked, and Russia, who it might be believed was the perpetrator of it. But as I've already said, and other people are saying, it is conceivable that this attack was carried out, or was not carried out, was an accident as a result of a Ukrainian missile, anti-aircraft missile, going rogue itself and tragically killing 2 Polish people on the ground.
If it is proven to be an accident, then what happens next? Do we just say, well, accidents happen, this conflict's been going on for a while, and then we move on?
Well, if it was proven to be an accident, and if it was proven that it was a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile, then Ukraine has got to make some kind of response in compensation, if you like, to Poland. 2 civilians, as we understand it, were killed. They've got families, they've got livelihoods, they've got lives that were cut off. So it would not be inappropriate for Ukraine to make a fairly fulsome apology and offer some form of compensation. And itself be even more careful about where it targets its anti-aircraft missiles. I mean, you can't blame the Ukrainians for firing many anti-aircraft missiles at the large number of incoming Russian missiles. After all, we all know that hundreds, thousands of Ukrainian civilians have been killed. Major elements of Ukraine's core national infrastructure, particularly power systems, have been destroyed in recent weeks. So this is a major response by the Ukrainians to a devastating attack on Ukraine itself by Russia. So I'm afraid the reality is that in a conflict like this, there are going to be accidents, there are going to be mistakes. But coming right back to where we were at the start of this conversation, it's really, really important to establish the facts before judgments are made and decisions are taken.
Of course, if the nuclear option, and I mean that literally, is established, that this wasn't an accident or that this was Russian handling, you'll know there'll be British forces families up and down the country very closely watching this morning, what it might mean for the United Kingdom. Because, of course, if it is proven to have been an attack on a NATO country, it will mean boots on the ground for us, won't it?
I think that's going a leap too far too soon, Isabel. I really come back to where we were before. We can speculate as much as we like about what the response might be, but let's first of all establish the facts and work out and find out what the cause of this explosion was and the reason behind the two people losing their lives. I think it's, even if it was decided that this was a Russian attack and believed that it was a deliberate Russian attack, it's a big leap to say there'll be British boots on the ground. It doesn't follow that way. There needs to be a measured rise up the escalatory ladder, and boots on the ground implying a NATO deployment into Ukraine, the NATO troops fighting on behalf of Ukraine against Russian soldiers. I mean, there's many, many leaps up the ladder before we get that far.
Yeah.
I think you're right. You're not wrong to ask the question, but actually, it's not the right question at this time.
OK, Lord Richard Dannett, always good to get your views. We really appreciate you coming on the programme. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we'll be expecting more from Rishi Sunak when he makes his speech at the G20 later this morning. We're hearing it's not going to be 8 o'clock, it'll now be more like 8:30, but we will bring that to you here on Breakfast. Let's go to the Deputy Digital Political Editor of the Daily Express, Dan Falvey, who joins us here in the studio. Dan, good to see you this morning. Obviously, this will be mentioned at PMQs later today, but then Dominic Raab will face some uncomfortable questions given the allegations surrounding his behaviour.
Yeah, I think what we're going to find is at the start of PMQs, Dominic Raab will stand up and he'll make a statement on behalf of the government condemning what's happened. And while there's uncertainty about exactly what happened with this missile, was it a Russian missile, was it a Ukrainian anti-missile, you know, there will be condemnation that this all happened because of the Russian missiles to begin with. No matter what happened, this is Russia's fault. And I think we'll then see Labour get up and echo those remarks and say, you know, we stand in solidarity with the whole House on this. And then I think we'll get back to politics as normal, and I think we'll see Labour will really drill in on the fact that Dominic Raab is at the dispatch box and really hit hard at the fact that there's bullying allegations against him.
Yeah, and we'll come back on to those, but I just want to talk about why Dominic Raab is standing in for the Prime Minister, because, of course, he is at the G20 in Bali. He's got a very big day. He's already had a bilateral meeting with the President of the United States. Later on, he'll be doing this speech in just over an hour's time, which we'll have live on the channel. But he's also meeting with Narendra Modi, the leader in India, as well as Xi Jinping. The first time in half a decade that we've had this kind of bilateral, and a significant softening from Prime Minister Sunak in terms of his language about China, which is provoking some criticism from within his own party.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But Isabel, I can just say that these are fast-moving events. You know, we're expecting that speech at 8 a.m. It's now been pushed back to 8:30. That bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping in the last few minutes, Number 10's actually confirmed they've had to cancel it. I think there is so much going on right now with Russia that, you know, meetings are being torn up left, right and centre in order to make room for more talks. So there's very fast-moving scenarios there. I think that actually plays into Rishi Sunak's hands slightly. Might be a slight sigh of relief for him, given the difficulties he was going to have with his backbenchers at home for having that meeting. It's a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free for him.
I mean, he was saying that the reason he wanted to meet with Xi Jinping was because you can't solve any of the big problems that the world faces today without China. That is as relevant to this situation in Russia as any of the other topics. So arguably, you know, apart from the fact that his diary is going to be very full, that would still have been an important and useful meeting, arguably.
Yes, and I think Rishi Sunak, the reason they put this meeting in the first place is because Rishi Sunak, despite his backbenchers' criticisms, he thinks that with Russia and China being allies, that you have to get Xi Jinping on board when it comes to tackling Russia on Ukraine. And Xi Jinping actually has been quite, I wouldn't say supportive of the West, but he's been echoing similar sentiments that actually this just, you know, we can't have the sort of threats that Russia is making. It just upsets the world order. So I think there is a fair bit of unity there in some of those languages, and I think that's what Rishi Sunak was hoping that he could help build on with Xi Jinping in that meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Appreciate your time. Dan Falvey, the digital political editor at the Daily Express. PMQ's coming up at midday, of course. We'll bring it to you here on GB News. It is 7:17. Your other top stories this morning.
In the last hour, NASA has launched the first Artemis moon mission. The flight launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and could pave the way for future human exploration of the moon.
The London Mayor Sadiq Khan is facing questions over the resignation of the former Met Police Commissioner. A report found Dame Cressida Dick felt intimidated into leaving her job and that due process was not followed before her departure. The Mayor dismissed the findings as clearly biased.
NHS England is urging GPs to order more cancer scans in a bid to speed up diagnoses for thousands of people. Under new guidance, doctors can order more ultrasounds and CT scans, testing patients' symptoms sooner and skipping the need to see a specialist first. Just in relation to that Artemis story, of course, we've had that launch in the last half an hour from Cape Canaveral. Well, I've just seen the Press Association this morning releasing news that the Civil Aviation Authority here in the UK have just awarded a historic licence, the first of its kind, to Spaceport Cornwall in Newquay, which will enable it to host the UK's first ever space launch, which I thought was really interesting.
And brilliant that it's in Cornwall.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to that.
Yeah.
That's big news, actually, in the British space industry. Some other big news that broke overnight, as well as what's been happening in Poland. Donald Trump saying this.
We always have known that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream. And it's a word you don't use, 2 words. I don't want to be Joe. It's 2 words, American dream. That was not good what he did. There are a lot of bad things, like going to Idaho and saying, welcome to the state of Florida. I really love it. In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Well, joining us now is the Democratic strategist, Calvin Dark, on what this could mean for the United States. I'm interested to know, actually, whether or not you are pleased to see he's running again, because it actually paved a pretty successful midterms for the Democrats, arguably.
Well, for our country, I don't think this is a very good decision, but just from a strict political standpoint for the Democratic Party, it's great, because if we're looking to 2024, why not look to someone that's already been soundly defeated by the Democrats and the sitting president to run against? So in that sense, it is good news.
In terms of who he could potentially face, though, Joe Biden, would he be too old? Certainly his position has been strengthened in terms of getting the Democratic nomination, given his successful midterm campaign.
Yes, the midterms have changed a little bit of the conversation when it comes to Joe Biden, because in his favor, obviously, he is the only Democrat that has defeated Donald Trump in an election. So he has that going for him. Obviously, issues of his age, he turns 80 on Sunday, is a major concern for Americans, particularly Democrats. But, let's kind of keep it in perspective. Donald Trump is 76. So age is relative. It depends on if both of them have the drive and the stamina and all that they need to campaign for 2 whole years before our election in 2024.
Well, so potentially then, given the age of both of those men, would it not be fair to say that if Ron DeSantis was given the Republican ticket, his age would give him a significant advantage, and he does carry some of the qualities, some of the audience, shall we put it, of some of the Republican fan base that Donald Trump has?
Yes, he definitely does, and his age is definitely a plus. But here's what's working against Ron DeSantis. He has not been tested nationally. He is extremely popular in Florida, just had a landslide election, re-election for governor in Florida. But a lot of his message resonates with Trump's base, which is decreasing. Now, I would say that's about 30 to 40% of the Republican Party. So for a Republican primary, he would definitely have a lot of support. But when it comes to nationally, independents, moderate Democrats, people on the progressive left, Ron DeSantis isn't that popular, and he hasn't been tested nationally for us to know if he could actually win.
I'm just curious about the way the story is being covered in the States. Certainly over in the UK, it feels as though the tide in terms of the media has turned, or is beginning to turn, against Trump. Fox News cutting short that speech at Mar-a-Lago last night. Rupert Murdoch announcing, you know what, time's up, I'm not going to support you in this, I'm going to support DeSantis. And we know, obviously, CNN, historically, always on the left of this. But is the right beginning to turn its back on Trump?
The right in media and the right in policymakers, the elites, the influencers, definitely. And I think for a lot of them, it's just strategic. Why would you elect someone who has continued to lose when they have been in the race, but then also when they've endorsed candidates who have lost? However, I'll have to wait till I see it from the base, because I know they want that to be true. I know they want to move on from Trump, but he has a very loyal base in the Republican Party, and there is no indication yet that they have decided to move on from Trump to someone else like Ron DeSantis or others.
Before we let you go, Calvin, Joe Biden obviously in a strong position now to run on the Democratic ticket in 2024. But if he didn't, who else is a front runner? And what happened to Kamala Harris?
Well, I think that there are, I would say, 5 or 6 on the Democratic side, a few in Joe Biden's cabinet, who could run, who ran against him in the primaries in 2020. Including Kamala Harris. Now, obviously, it would be a challenge because I don't think she's at the top of that list. But you know what? It's 2 years. A lot can change between now and November of 2024. And if Biden doesn't decide to run again, it gives whoever on the Democratic side enough time to build up that name and that reputation and get that support to face Donald Trump or whomever the Republicans pick as their candidate in November 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. 2 years is an eternity in politics, especially given the pace at which politics has been happening here in the UK. Really good to get your thoughts, Calvin. Thank you.
Yeah, that's Calvin Dark, Democratic strategist, with that for us from Washington.
After the break, we'll be going through all the big sports stories of the day with Aidan McGee as the 3 Lions land in Qatar. Stand by.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 7:29, a busy news morning, and still plenty more to come on the programme this morning at 7:45. We're going to be speaking to the social housing activist Kwejo Twenoboa. That's after an inquest found that a 2-year-old died as a result of mould in the flat where he lived. Shocking, really, in 2022.
Just appalling. And the football used in Diego Maradona's legendary Hand of God goal goes on auction tomorrow, expected to sell for millions. We'll speak to the man auctioning it at 8:45.
And as always, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
Yeah, so that auction taking place later of the ball from 1986 that Maradona famously handballed into the goal during Argentina's win over England. And it's going to be the first World Cup, Aidan McGee, without Maradona.
Yes, I know, yeah, very sad indeed. In fact, I've got a story about that game, actually. Terry Fenwick, who...
Go on, lad, back in there.
Yeah, back in the day. Terry Fenwick, who was a QPR player who I support, he played in that game. He was the closest to Maradona, apart from Shilton, when he made the Hand of God incident. I actually had Terry Fenwick's shirt in my possession for about 5 years, but I did the right thing and gave it back to the family.
Did you? How did you get hold of his shirt?
His son sold it to me for £15. They were doing a clear out of his garage, and I went, 15 quid. This was like 1997. I went, yeah, all right, I'll have that. And I had a few other bits and pieces as well. But I gave it all back to the family. I must stress that. And all his kids live abroad now, so hopefully that maybe they're not watching. I'm not sure, but they've got it all back. So.
You had Terry Fenwick's shirt for 15 quid for 5 years.
1.5, not 50, 1.5. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
And 1990, that's a lot of money for me in 1997.
Yeah, I think the ball's going to go for more than that.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, it's a lovely ball. Those tango balls are amazing. I had an Adidas Azteca myself. It was a £10 version. But it's a beautiful, beautiful ball, and they should reproduce it now. Really, you see the ones now, the Adidas ones they have at tournaments now. They're not usually got the triangular pattern on it that you had back in '86, but it's a beautiful ball. And to hold it as well, to hold an original, it's almost got like a latex feel to the outside. Wow, it just smells so good.
Listen to him going on about that ball. You love that ball. You love that ball, don't you?
Yeah,
I do. I've never heard someone talk about a football.
Oh, goodness me! There's I mean, people regularly put pictures on Twitter of the original balls and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Especially you had an orange version as well for the
Spain. Yeah. Anyway,
World
Cup starting on Sunday.
Yeah, build up, fully underway.
England are there. What's happened since they've been in Qatar for a day or two?
Yeah, no, they got there yesterday, so they've gone and they've linked up with their teammates and all the officials there. They've been greeted outside the hotel. They've got a training base as well. Now, what's interesting here, Paul, is that normally you'd spend 3 or 4 weeks, or maybe not 3 or 4 weeks, certainly a week and a half, 2 weeks in a training camp. I mean, if you think back to Brazil in 2014, Germany actually built their own training camp and left it behind afterwards, and it was changed into a school for local children. So it was a big, big deal. Yeah. This time, and again, it feeds into the dynamics of how the tournament's going to play out. England haven't really got that time, and none of the other countries have got that time to settle into a training base. I remember being in Qatar, funnily enough, in 2010, at the start of the South Africa World Cup. Okay. So I was doing some work over there for the News of the World.
That was weird.
And yeah, it was a little bit, but I was getting messages from England players, I won't say who, saying, goodness me, we're locked up for 8 hours a day here. We're going out of our nut. Yeah. Because they're just waiting for the game to start. And the manager was very disciplinary and he wanted them focused on the game. Fabio Capello, indeed. They wanted him, all the players holed up in their hotel room, focused on the game. And it was a complete antidote to 4 years earlier. Do you remember the circus around Baden-Baden in Germany when Sven-Göran Eriksson invited all the wags?
In fact, it became like a real media point, didn't it? This whole build-up, and they'd be at the camp and where are the wags and all this kind of stuff. And all this.
Well, the funniest thing...
This is just finish playing football for your club and then get there and start playing.
The funniest thing about Baden-Baden was that you had... In the morning, the wags would wake up and go for a run around the circle, around the park. You had the English paparazzi chasing them to get stories. Then you had the international paparazzi
it's making my head
chasing the English paparazzi. It was like Benny Hill stuff.
Yeah.
It was brilliant. But it was totally different 4 years later. But you're having none of that this time. They're not having any time to settle in. And I wonder if that might play to the players' advantage because they just finished competitive football. They all played last weekend. Most of them avoiding injury. James Maddison having a little knock, of course. But I wonder if they're just being thrown straight into the action. Will that help them? How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel like their fitness will be good, but whether or not their collective team strategy will be there is questionable.
I think Southgate will be relying on the fact that the squad has been together for quite a while, over a number of years, and maybe that bridge has been crossed, if you like, and hopefully this time they'll just get in there. I mean, look, it's not. I have to say, Iran shouldn't be a really tough game for England on Monday. I shouldn't think.
Well, I'm sure the Iranians will be up for that. And don't forget, the Welsh are also in Qatar as well.
Yes, indeed. That's right. That's right. Gareth Bale yesterday declaring himself 100% fit, ready to play all 3 games.
And irrespective of fitness, he always turns up for the big occasions.
Yes, he did. But my worry, though, I think I touched on it yesterday. 28 minutes since September.
Yeah.
It's just difficult, and I don't think they're in quite as good shape as they were in Euro 2016. However, it's their first World Cup in 64 years. I mean, anything could happen.
And who are they playing on Monday? Wales are playing...
USA.
USA. That might be a bit more tricky than Iran.
Well, yes, it will be. But USA, they're not as peak as they were maybe 10 years ago, but they've had a really good season in terms of the players that are in the squad. They're not bad. They're quite strong, and they've performed well. They tend to get out of the group.
Yeah, and you're going to get a crystal ball, is that?
I bought a crystal ball. Yeah, I mean, if it gives me the wrong predictions, I have got a receipt. So I can get a return.
Mystic McGee, Mystic Mellor
I know,
might have something to say about that.
Mysticity,
it's becoming a theme throughout the programme. Aidan
Yeah.
McGee, lovely. Thank you very much indeed for that. So we mentioned David Mellor there, and his mysticity. He'll be here with Tessie Ojo to go through the papers just after this break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Right, it's time to go through the papers. My favourite part of the programme. We're joined this morning by the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor, and the CEO of the Diana Awards, Tessie Ojo. Good morning to both of you. And it is one of those days, actually, where I hate to say it, but a lot of the papers are a little bit behind the curve because of the fast pace of news overnight. But this story remains up to date, David, which you've chosen to lead this segment. Page 9 of the Times, the headline, Raab is just demanding of staff. And this is his allies trying to be dismissive of these allegations of bullying against the Deputy Prime Minister.
Dominic Raab. I'll take a blood pressure pill, another one I have to. But look, the thing, what was it? Somebody once said that a gentleman is someone who is never unintentionally rude. Well, Raab, on that definition, is not a gentleman because he apparently is completely unaware of the impact he has on his staff. So even his permanent secretary, Lord MacDonald of Salford, impressive name, this is his description of Raab's activities. It was language, it was tone. He would be very curt with people, and he did this in front of a lot of other people. I think people felt demeaned. You see, some people rise without trace. One of those who's risen without trace is Dominic Raab. I mean, what was he before Boris decided to make him Deputy Prime Minister? He'd done next to nothing. He was then became Foreign Secretary and had to be removed from the post because he stayed on holiday. I mean, probably that's the best place for him. Maybe he should stay on holiday permanently. But essentially, he stayed on holiday when he should have been at his post. And this is where, you know, I long to believe in Rishi Sunak. And as you know, I've always promoted him on this programme as the best of the Tory bunch. But he does seem to blunder around a bit when it comes to these personalities. He didn't have... Sorry, I will shut up. But he didn't have to make Raab Deputy Prime Minister. So why did he?
Well, he said, I don't recognise the characterisation of Dominic's behaviour.
Well, I don't much care whether he does or whether he doesn't. It's what other people think. And look, the reality is a permanent secretary, that is a big cheese, you know, and... you know, once again, I just draw on my own experience. I mean, there are some people who probably think I'm a pretty horrible person. But in 11 years as a minister, I never had a complaint by a civil servant against me. And, you know, when your private office, they work all the hours that God gave and then a few more. I can't imagine ever having that kind of relationship with one's private office. And I tell you what, if those things had been said about me in Mrs. Thatcher's time, I'd have been out the door.
Yes, but do you think the world has changed in the sense that, you know, politics is a bit scrappier now and there's a lot more abuse being hurled around within parties, between the civil servants and the ministers, and people just need to toughen up a bit? I mean, there will be that argument, won't there, that, you know...
Yeah, I guess
they're
people
grown
will...
men.
But he shouldn't really be talking to people. I mean, look, you can convey displeasure. You can suggest... I'm glad to get it on. You can suggest that someone isn't doing as well as they should in civilised ways, but at the end, you know, I'm not sure where touching goes in these days. You put your arm around his shoulder and say, come on, you can do better than this. That's what we want.
I think that, do you know what, this is an interesting conversation because this week is National Anti-Bullying Week. And one of the things that we know from statistics, from my job, is that bullying, when people experience bullying, it has huge effects on them for a long time, right from childhood into the workplace. And I just do not accept and condone any form of bullying behaviour. There is a way to be respectful, and I completely agree with that. One of the things that we are doing actually as a charity is teaching right from primary what does respect mean. Respect doesn't mean that we would always agree. It's about knowing how to respectfully disagree, knowing how to accept that people have different views, knowing how to win people over without demeaning them. And I just think that in today's world, we're dealing with so many things. You should never go into the workplace and feel scared of your boss. That's just wrong.
Yeah. I
agree with that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see PMQs later today, 12 from midday, which we'll bring to you here on GB News. Tessie, you wanted to talk about the front page of The Telegraph, 1/5 of pupils missing from classrooms since pandemic.
Yes, and again, I'm a chief exec of a children's charity. This is not something that's news to us. But again, it just shows the state. I think this story shines a spotlight on. I often say that children are sort of are not the face of the pandemic, and we would only begin to see the consequences of the pandemic long after everyone else has forgotten about it. This story is showing that a fifth of children are missing in the classroom since the pandemic for various reasons. There's a percentage of children whose parents have opted to educate from home, but much larger than that, there are children who are unable to go out. They're still dealing with anxiety, are unable to leave their homes and therefore not able to go into school. There are children, we know from this week, that is National Anti-Bullying Week, that 83% of children are still experiencing bullying and as a result are not going into school. Now, this is a whole generation who, A, have missed out of education because of the pandemic, who experienced lockdown like no other generation. If we are losing a fifth of our children from being in school, they're missing out on education. What does that mean for our future? What does that mean in terms of life chances of those children? I just think that we're not really, this is a huge crisis that's completely under the radar. We're dealing with other stuff that this is going to come back and bite us.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Barclay, the new Education Secretary, needs to really get a grip on this urgently, doesn't he, David?
Yes, and but I think the whole education system needs to. It's always a mistake, I think, to put too much on ministers when actually it's head teachers in a whole range of schools who've got to deal with it.
It's not Steve Barclay, is it? It's Gillian Keegan.
Yeah, but that was last week.
Yeah,
and now
sorry,
this week.
it's trying to keep on top.
And learn the name of the one that's coming next week. Mystic Mellow will tell you who it's going to be.
It's all stabilised. I think it's all stabilised now, but it's Gillian Keegan, in education now.
Staying with the Telegraph, David, page 14, Albanian migrants coached to play police. What do they mean by play?
Well, I think that where we've got to is that suddenly from there being, a couple of years ago, about 50 Albanians arriving in the UK. Now it's 10 or 12,000, and it's suggested, sounds like one of those statistics that is probably not true, but nevertheless it was put in one of the papers that 2% of the population of Albania between 20 and 40 was trying or had succeeded in coming to the UK. Men. And so essentially these people are brought over, a lot of them, unfortunately, for criminal purposes, and yet because of the Modern Slavery Act, they then get coached as to what they say in order to pretend that they are not, or to claim, whether they're pretending or not, for others to determine. They come here and it's like they say they're coming because they are the victims of modern slavery, not coming to enrich themselves. And I think the government's just got to get a grip of this, I mean, what we can't have, you see, I'm a great believer in migrants. I think this country needs people to come in who are qualified to come in, who want to come in, who are decent people and want to build a better future. I'm not against that. But I think if someone turns up on a beach with a criminal background, we should be surely sophisticated enough to be able to chuck them out again without too much trouble. And it's the fact that people can jump queues in that way, which is not good for the country.
Which goes back to the system again and the problems with the system.
And has implications on housing, social housing here in the UK, which is a topic we are going to talk about after the bulletin. But we have to end the paper review now so we can get to that segment. But Tessie Ojo and David Mellor, thank you very much indeed. We'll see more from them both just after 8:30.
It is 7:47. Let's bring you up to date with our top stories this morning then. Donald Trump announcing he's running to be US president again. The billionaire's aides have filed paperwork for his 2024 White House bid as the former president launched his intention to regain the title.
We always have known that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream. And it's a word you don't use. 2 words. I don't want to be Joe. It's 2 words. American dream. That was not good what he did. There are a lot of bad things, like going to Idaho and saying, welcome to the state of Florida. I really love it. In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
In other news, the rate of consumer prices index inflation has risen again to 11.1% last month. The Office for National Statistics says that's up from 10.1% in September. It said rising gas and electricity prices has driven inflation to its highest level for over 40 years.
And some other news that's broken this morning. NASA launching the first Artemis moon mission this morning. The flight launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and could pave the way for future human exploration of the moon. Meanwhile, the Civil Aviation Authority says it's awarded an operating licence to a site in Newquay that would allow it to host the UK's first space launch.
OK, really a tragic story now. A coroner yesterday concluded that a 2-year-old boy was killed as a result of prolonged exposure to extensive mould in his mother's flat.
Awab Ishaq died after suffering a cardiac arrest brought on by a severe respiratory condition, with one pathologist stating that fungus was found in both his blood and lungs.
Well, surveyors later described the toddler's home as unfit for human habitation, and his death is being recognised as a defining moment for the housing sector.
Joining us in the studio this morning is social housing activist Kwajo Twenebo. Kwajo, thanks for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. This is a shocking case, but given how much you know about the situation with regards to social housing in this country, how surprised are you?
I mean, it's absolutely frustrating that I'm having to sit here after campaigning for a year and a half to try and prevent something like this happening. It's all too common, all too frequent. In terms of damp and mould especially, it's happening to thousands across the country, and young people are massively affected but it isn't spoken about. I mean, in the last 18 months alone, I've been contacted by over 300 different families complaining of living in damp and mould and being ignored by their landlords. Last week, for example, I was contacted in a 24-hour period by 27 families alone about living in disrepair. It's a huge, huge crisis.
And these are videos that we're looking at now that you've filmed of mould in exactly that, in social housing up and down the country, and it's something that you've spent a great deal of time exposing. One of the defining characteristics in this tragic case of Awab Ishaq is that his father and his parents repeatedly complained. They were aware of the impact it was having on their child's health. They saw him decline, and yet, over and over again, they were ignored.
Absolutely. I mean, it was even said that they were complaining before he was born about damp and mould, and he died he died when he was 2 years old. But tenants being ignored is something that I see on a daily basis, and we see with this case, and what is very identical, is that professionals even reach out on behalf of these families and these kids to housing providers, doctors, nurses, head teachers, but all too often it is ignored. In a lot of cases that I've seen, housing professionals don't even bother to respond to letters or emails from professionals. That's how bad it is, and they're just allowed to get away with it.
Well, just to put across the point of view of Rochdale Borough Council, and this is where this little boy was living. Gareth Swarbrick, the chief executive of RBH, said in a statement he was truly devastated about Awab's death and the things we got wrong. Nothing could bring Awab back, he said, but added, we have and will continue to learn hard lessons from this. We didn't recognise the level of risk to a little boy's health from the mould in the family's home. We allowed a legal disrepair process widely used in the housing sector to get in the way of promptly tackling the mould. They must make sure this can never happen again. So clearly they are putting their hands up and saying, look, we got this wrong. Do you think that's enough?
No, absolutely not. And lessons should have been learnt 5.5 years ago, just after Grenfell, when Grenfell happened. But here we are having this conversation now. To Rochdale Borough-wide housing, this has been a learning exercise. To the parents of Awab, it's cost the life of their young son.
Look, I understand a social regulation bill is being looked at the moment, which will bring in Ofsted-style inspections of social housing. Do you have much hope, then, that will be something that will positively change it, especially with the pressure and the spotlight being shined on it in the wake of this case?
I hope so. I do think it will have positive change. Whether it goes far enough, that's a whole nother question. Having seen this in similar cases where tenants are dying in their homes, because I've spoken to thousands of tenants across the country, I think we need even more. I think criminal charges need to be brought against landlords in situations like this, where tenants are dying in their homes as a direct result of their negligence. And until we get that, I'll be back on this show talking about this 6 months' time from now with about a different family, because it's just simply allowed. We do need criminal charges and landlords truly held to account.
I can see you're really emotional about this, sort of angry but also upset.
Absolutely fuming, especially with this situation, because it could have been avoided. Like we said, this family had been failed on multiple levels, and the thing is, tenants do complain. No one wants to live in these sorts of conditions, so that whole argument is completely flawed. It's frustrating.
And does racism play a role in this? Some people say it does.
Yes, I mean, social housing is made up of many different sort of people from different backgrounds, but the majority of people that I've spoken to up and down the country, and I've spoken to thousands over the last 18 months, are predominantly from black and ethnic minority backgrounds. And when you contrast that and the class of individuals who are living in social housing with those that make up the directors' boards, they don't match whatsoever, and there's no correlation between the two.
Because I just wanted to put to you a viewer's comment. They've said the damp flat death was not because of racism. My daughter has lived in a 2-bedroom semi in Swinton, and it's damp in the kitchen, dividing walls, bedrooms and bathroom. Is this because City West can't be bothered to fix it, or is this racism too?
I think in that situation, I don't know who that individual is, but it could be a mixture of two. I've spoken to tenants up and down the country from black and ethnic minority backgrounds, and they do say they feel in some cases it's because of their race, their background, their class, their accents, that they're not taken seriously. I've spoken to tenants, including, I mean, my dad used to use his English middle name in order to be taken seriously or feel like they were going to care more in order to get his points across and to get help. And loads of tenants have told me similar stories, so I definitely think racism plays a part.
And Quajo, look, we're almost out of time, and it's a big question, but lots of our viewers want to know whether or not you think that the asylum situation is putting extra pressure on social housing. There's been 40,000 coming into this country. The shortage of social housing, meaning many of them having to be put up in hotels. I mean, is that an element that's putting extra pressure on social housing, or do you think that it makes people in social housing more frustrated that they're not getting access to hotel rooms when illegal immigrants are?
No, I don't think we can use immigrants as scapegoats for this situation. What it is consecutive government failing to prioritise housing in this country, building social housing. We've got 1.25 million people waiting to get into social housing. And let me make it very clear, because I have spoken to asylum seekers coming into the country, living in absolutely squalid conditions, crammed into homes, living in disrepair. This idea that a red carpet's rolled out for them or they're living a life of luxury is completely false. There is a failure in housing at the moment, and it doesn't matter whether you're an asylum seeker or you were born here. Tenants and human beings are suffering at the end of the day, and that's the problem here. That is what needs to change.
OK, Quajo Teneboa, a social housing activist. Very powerful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, lots of you getting in touch with us on this story this morning. James says, that poor boy, it's disgusting that the council did nothing about the conditions of the family's house. Yet, says James, they can spend millions on putting so-called migrants up in fancy hotels. Which is
Paul says, I'm an ex-British soldier. I've not slept in my bedroom for 3 years because of mould. I sleep on my settee. Sheffield Council have done nothing. Keep your thoughts coming in. We've got to take a break. All the latest from the G20 after this.
The Chancellor has a problem. He's got £55 billion to find, and it could soon become your problem too. Tax rises and cuts could be coming, but where will the axe fall? Benefits and pensions, support for energy bills, or social care? To find out what it means for you and your family, the Chancellor's autumn statement, live here on GB News tomorrow from 10 a.m.
Hello there, it's Eamonn Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden hold critical talks after a missile strikes NATO territory.
Good morning. It is 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 16th of November. You're watching Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and Paul Hawkins. Our top story this morning.
World leaders have held emergency talks in Bali amid rising global tensions after a missile landed in Poland, killing 2 civilians. It follows one of the biggest bombardments of Ukraine by Russia since the start of the war.
Also this morning,
I'm tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
He's running for the White House again, saying in a speech that he wants to make America great and glorious again.
The Prime Minister has urged officials with concerns about the behaviour of Dominic Raab to come forward. It follows a series of bullying accusations against the Deputy Prime Minister.
And the Artemis rocket has taken off from Cape Canaveral. The historic NASA mission aims to send people back to the moon for the first time in 50 years.
And as always, we love to hear from you. We are the People's Channel. Send in your thoughts via Twitter or on email.
Our top story this morning then, Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak holding one-on-one talks in Bali after a missile landed on a farm in Prevodov in Poland, killing 2 people. Downing Street declining to comment on reports that the missile was fired by Ukraine as an incoming Russian missile.
Well, speaking this morning after a meeting of G7 and NATO leaders, President Biden was asked whether the weapons were fired from Russia.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it is it's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia. But we'll see.
It comes after Russia launched one of the biggest bombardments of Ukraine since the start of the war, with President Zelensky saying 85 missiles have been launched at his country.
Well, joining us now for the latest analysis is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Look, lots of caution being exercised by leaders in the West as they try to establish the facts around this. At the moment, certainly American intelligence appearing to suggest that this was a Ukrainian missile being launched to defend against a Russian missile which strayed into Polish territory.
Yeah, I think with these stories, momentous events, it's often the best policy not to rush to immediate judgment. And last night it looked, as far as most people were concerned, that this was a Russian missile that may have gone astray but landed in Poland. And that, of course, in itself would have been a major escalation. But now the indications are, you heard it there from President Biden, again, 3 senior security officials quoted by the Associated Press anonymously, suggesting, just as you say, that it may have indeed been a Ukrainian missile trying to shoot down Russian missiles. But that in itself is an indication of what happens when you have the Russian military firing some 80 missiles into Ukraine throughout yesterday, into civilian areas, trying to target infrastructure, hitting civilian areas as well. And I think it will serve to galvanise support, really, for Ukraine, even if it was a Ukrainian missile. You know, the Ukrainians have been calling for some time now for NATO to provide them with more in the way of support, with fighter aircraft, with air defence missiles, more technology to be able to combat the threat, particularly from the air from Russia.
But it seems unlikely that they're going to get that if this does prove to be kind of a Ukrainian missile that caused this.
I'm not so sure. I think they will. I think this issue has really galvanised again, you know, at a point where people were perhaps a little sort of concerned as to what way support for Ukraine was going. This is a protracted campaign, and some real concern that the longer it goes on with countries in the West, NATO members facing their own crises at home because of economic issues, would they still have the wherewithal and the will to give Ukraine the money and equipment that it needs? But something like this, coming on the back of what was a major escalation just in itself yesterday, with all those missiles going into Ukraine, and seen actually as a snub to the G20, because, of course, Vladimir Putin decided he wasn't going to go to the G20. He sent Sergei Lavrov instead and some of his officials. There was this heated exchange, of course, with Rishi Sunak at the G20 condemning Russia. And then on the very day, you know, that is happening, this very clear message, as many see it, from Russia, this snub of sending these missiles into Ukraine. We wait, as I say, to see exactly whether this was a Ukrainian missile or not. But as I say, you know, the optics of it in terms of what is happening in Ukraine with this escalation from Russia, which is smarting from losing Kherson, that city in the south of the country, you know, I think it will play out in Ukraine's favour in terms of galvanising support for them.
It's straight out of the Putin playbook, this now, isn't it, though? It seems as though every time there is a sort of global meeting of leaders, whether it be the United Nations and there's criticism of Russia, or whether you've got Prime Minister Sunak calling Russia a rogue state yesterday, and this reaction from Putin with these missiles being fired in, it is a bit of a reminder to all of us of where these are going to be flashpoints, because there's always been this fear, hasn't there, that an accident could actually be the thing that triggers World War III, that an Article 5 reaction from NATO of a NATO country being hit could accidentally, you know, lead us into something we really don't want to go into.
Yeah, it was one of the biggest fears, I think, when war started raging within a democratic European country, right on the fringes of the European Union and bordering, of course, all those NATO countries. We got warnings from Western leaders to Russia that, you know, be very careful, because if this escalates and a NATO country is targeted either deliberately or accidentally, then there will be very significant consequences. Well, we are seeing, you know, in essence, that playing out, even if it was accidentally launched from Ukraine to attack a Russian missile, it's still an escalation. It will be seen as by NATO, and it will have consequences. The consequences, I believe, will be just even more steel and resolve from NATO to come together behind Ukraine at this time to give it the defences that it needs to protect itself from these attacks from Russia.
OK. Mark White, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, well, Mark mentioned the G20, which is taking place right now in Bali. World leaders talking about what's been happening in Poland there. Lots of reaction then to get stuck into. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, sent this earlier.
Well, given that missile attack on the Ukrainian-Polish border, G7 leaders actually met here in an emergency forum at the G20 this morning. That includes the US President Joe Biden, the Canadian Prime Minister, many European leaders, including Rishi Sunak, were there as well, discussing precisely what the response should be and what the intelligence is telling them about this missile strike. Now, we've heard from President Biden, US officials suggesting it was not an attack from Russia, that this missile may well have come from inside Ukraine. But clearly there is concern about this conflict spilling over, not least of all to another European NATO member. And we've heard also this morning from the Prime Minister and indeed from the US President, who have met here at the summit in Bali, in which they talked about how this was barbaric and all part of Putin's war that should come to an end. This is what Joe Biden said as the Prime Minister and him met. He said, at the moment we're seeing world leaders gather here in Bali, seeking progress on world peace. Meanwhile, Putin is striking civilian targets, children and women. I mean, it's almost, in your words, not mine, barbaric, says Joe Biden. So the meeting here amongst the G20 has slightly got changed. There's been changes and meetings moved and cancelled because of what has happened on the Polish-Ukrainian border, and there will be wider concern beyond the G7 about what has happened. Clearly, Russia is suggesting that any reports that they were behind this missile attack are untrue. There is another meeting, though, happening here in Bali today of real significance in the Prime Minister's last day, and that is with the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. It's the first time the British Prime Minister, a British Prime Minister, has met the Chinese Premier in 5 years, and we're expecting Rishi Sunak to call on a frank and constructive relationship with China during the meeting. He is going to talk about how China has got fundamentally different values from the UK, but they want to work together and coordinate on some of the big global challenges the world faces where there is common ground. Now, there has been some criticism back home about whether Rishi Sunak is going soft on China to a degree, whether the language is changing a little. Now, Downing Street have batted out away, saying that China remains a challenge and a threat to the United Kingdom, but it will be a very, very important meeting, not least of all because, as I say, it's the first time that there's been a meeting between a British Prime Minister and a Chinese Premier in 5 years. And then, after all that, the Prime Minister is going to leave Bali, where the weather has somewhat also changed, and head home for that really important autumn statement tomorrow.
Point out, actually, Darren McCaffrey with that a little bit earlier, but just due to the fast pace of events, that bilateral between Xi Jinping, the leader of China, and Prime Minister Sunak has been cancelled. So that isn't happening. It was going to be the first time in half a decade, but I will have to wait.
Yeah, but Rishi Sunak will be making a speech just after 8:30 at the G20, and we will bring that to you live here on Breakfast. In the meantime, let's go to the local government editor of Conservative Home, Harry Phibbs. Harry, what have you made of how Rishi Sunak's dealt with this situation in Poland so far this morning?
Oh, I think he's, very capable, very confident, calm leader. So, I think we'll be reassured by that. But I think, if anything, it will probably show the importance of keeping up the support for the Ukrainians, because the only way that we're going to end this war is when Russia is defeated, when Russia withdraws, and it just shows that as long as the war continues. To be right on the border of a NATO partner, it's extremely dangerous. So I think, if anything, that will show that we need to maintain our resolve. And the idea that we can just sort of forget about it and think, we'll let it rumble on and deal with other things is obviously shown to be mistaken.
What about the meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak this morning? The first time they've sat down together, historic moment in and of itself. And it certainly seems as though they may be able to be quite a good working pair.
Yes, I mean, he was very... President Biden, despite the slip up over his name, was very generous in his welcome of Rishi Sunak, wasn't he? I think there'll be a lot of goodwill there. And on this point about about Ukraine, I mean, it's interesting that we had the midterm elections in America last week, and most Conservatives would normally be rooting for the Republicans, wanting to, we'd be anti-woke, a low tax, tough on crime, they'll be nationalised. But the Republicans have got this unfortunate sort of America First isolationist streak, completely different to the tradition of Ronald Reagan of wanting to stand up for freedom. And the Democrats are being rather more robust on Ukraine. So, Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden would be on the same team in terms of saying we mustn't appease Russian aggression. So I think they probably get on perfectly well together personally, but more importantly, their policies would be in alignment. I think.
Yeah, and Rishi Sunak, of course, because he's at the G20, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, will be fielding questions at PMQs later today. And it's going to be a difficult PMQs for him, given the allegations that surround his behaviour.
Yes, and the only thing I think might possibly save him is that there's something almost comic about the whole thing about he had his Pret salad, and then one of the civil servants came in with some bad news or something, some advice he didn't like, and there's allegation that he then started taking out the tomatoes and throwing them at people. I almost feel that the comic aspect of it is hard to actually feel it's bullying in a sort of nasty, sinister way if the civil servant sort of ducking with these tomatoes being thrown. But no, obviously it's not ideal timing for him to be standing in doing PMQs while he himself is under attack over these allegations.
Yeah, look, as a political sketch writer's absolute dream. Really interesting to get your take on it all. Harry Phibbs, local government editor for Conservative Home. Thank you very much indeed. And just a reminder, we are expecting to hear live from the Prime Minister from Bali right here, which will broadcast on GB News in around 15 minutes' time. All things seem to be moving quite quickly at the G20, though, so that time liable to change. But yeah, we'll have that update for you from the Prime Minister.
Yeah, it is 8:15. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories. NASA launching the first Artemis moon mission from the Cape Kennedy Space Center in Florida this morning. This comes as the Civil Aviation Authority says it has awarded an operating licence here in the UK to Spaceport Cornwall in Newquay, which means it will host the UK's first space launch.
The rate of inflation has risen again to 11.1%. That's up from 10.1% in September, according to the Office for National Statistics. Rising gas and electricity prices have driven inflation to its highest level for over 40 years.
NHS England is urging GPs to order more cancer scans in a bid to speed up diagnoses for thousands of people. Under new guidance, doctors can order more ultrasounds and CT scans, testing patients' symptoms sooner and skipping the need to see a specialist first.
Now, the much-anticipated President Trump announcing of his candidacy took place last night at Mar-a-Lago, as he said he will be putting his hat in the ring to run for president in 2024. He promised to shatter the forces of tyranny and to unleash the glories of liberty for the United States.
Yeah, in his speech, he vowed to tackle the ongoing economic crisis and confront Russian aggression. And here's what he said.
We always have known that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream. And it's a word you don't use, 2 words. I don't want to be Joe. It's 2 words, American dream. That was not good what he did. There are a lot of bad things, like going to Idaho and saying, welcome to the state of Florida. I really love it. In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Well, joining us now is Greg Swenson. He's the chair of Republicans Overseas UK. Now, we were speaking yesterday, weren't we, whilst the results were beginning to trickle through from the midterms without the arrival of that red tsunami, which we were predicting put President Trump in a difficult position, really. We were sort of questioning whether or not he would still go ahead. Silly question, I suppose. Yeah. If you know anything about Donald Trump, you know he was always going to do it. But can he do it? Can he win?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more challenging than perhaps he thinks, or definitely more challenging than it was in 2016. So, you know, a lot has changed since the last election, and I don't think it will be easy for the president. In fact, I think there's a good chance he would lose, both in the primary or if by some miracle he won the primaries, he would lose in the general. So there's a risk there. This is a different situation than we had 6 years ago.
Yeah, can he win the next election?
He can. But I don't think he will. You know, I mean, the odds are not good for President Trump right now. The metrics have changed. You know, he lost in the midterms in 2018. He lost in 2020. And then his endorsed, or should I say, the candidates that were selected by him did very poorly in this midterm election last week. So, you know, all those electoral challenges are obvious. So whether you like him or not, or whether he did a good job as president or not, doesn't really matter if he can't win elections.
Is he a problem for the Republicans now? I know that an influential group of Conservative donors have basically said, look, here's the polling, DeSantis is our man in a lot of the key states. Yeah. Trump last night dismissing them as rhinos, Republicans in name only. And there is a core of support for Trump, for the things that he stands for, and a lot of it being represented in our views this morning from some of our listeners and watchers. Dudley saying Trump's time in office had the world a much safer place. Who else has taken the trouble to put Rocket Boy back in his box? Bill says, great news about Trump, the man who puts America first and fights the undemocratic globalists. So many people sharing that view.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, you think about what he did, tax reform and deregulation and energy security, conservative or constitutionalist judges, the Abraham Accords, all these good things that he did. But the difference is it's not rhinos that he's now facing. He's facing the new generation of Republicans or conservatives that actually are a lot like him, or at least according to most, and the views are that from a policy perspective, they're very much like Trump. So this isn't Trump versus Jeb Bush or McCain or Romney. This is Trump versus Mike DeSantis,
right?
You know, Governor Youngkin in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. So these are the new generation. So I don't think he's going to really have much argument by saying people are rhinos. The big donors faded on Trump before the midterms.
Okay.
They'd already faded, and really, I mean, he's got the grassroots in many respects, but it's shrinking.
And you get to vote in the primaries, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Who will you be voting for then? Who's your choice?
My personal choice would be DeSantis right now.
Right.
But I have to say, I like all. I like Mike Pompeo. I like Glenn Youngkin. Mike's a great guy. He's been over here to London a few times. But right now, DeSantis has all the political capital. So I want to win, first of all. And DeSantis has the highest probability of winning. He's polling very well against Trump in head-to-head matchups right now. The problem is if too many people run from the right, they'll split the non-Trump vote, which is what happened in 2016.
Yeah.
But again, the difference back then was you had 14 kind of establishment, moderate Republicans, you know, country club Republican types splitting the anti-Trump vote. Trump was only getting a third of the primary voters in 2016 for the most of the primaries.
Yeah.
Right now, it would be Trump versus conservative, fight back, combative candidates
him,
that are like, a lot like him.
Ron v. Don.
But what's amazing is they're able to be combative and push back against the media and push back against the progressive left, but also be likable.
Yeah.
And that's the trick. And it can be done, and DeSantis and Youngkin have proved that. So is Brian Kemp and Greg Abbott in Texas. So many people are proving that can be done. And Trump is still in he's still in this mode of, I must be obnoxious to
bring back
to
the gentleman.
Yeah,
bring back the country club gentleman.
If you can combine the two.
It's going to be fascinating to watch, the two different styles.
It's exciting.
Whose man is always the answer. So interesting to get your take. Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, cheers, Greg. 8:22 after the break as the Chancellor promises support for the most vulnerable in the autumn statement. We'll hear from a man who says that he'd be dead without the help of food banks, and we'll also take that speech from Rishi Sunak live from the G20. So lots coming up.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio,
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart. And I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 8:26. Still to come on the programme this morning. At 9:05, we'll get Labour's reaction to that speech we're expecting in around 2.5 minutes' time from Prime Minister Sunak. We'll be speaking to Shadow Minister Jonathan Ashworth about it.
Yeah, Rishi Sunak speaking at the G20, and at 9:15, Andrew Pearce will be here giving us his take on all the big stories of the day. Remember, you can join in the conversation. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews.
Well, some breaking news to bring you from the G20 just as we await Prime Minister Sunak taking that podium with his speech from there on the communiqué that has been agreed by all the leaders at the close of that summit in Bali. They said that most members, because of course remember Sergei Lavrov among those attending from Russia, strongly condemned the war in Ukraine, stressed it is causing immense human suffering and exacerbating existing fragilities in the global economy, constraining growth, increasing inflation, disrupting disrupting supply chains, heightening energy and food insecurity, and elevating financial stability risks. They go on to say there were other views and different assessments of the situation and sanctions, but recognising that the G20 is not the forum to resolve security issues, we acknowledge that security issues can have significant consequences for the global economy, all of which I'm sure the Prime Minister will touch on in that speech in around a minute's time.
Yeah, in the meantime, let's just get some more on this missile strike in Poland, about 4 miles west of Poland's border with Ukraine. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, joins us. Mark, we're still not sure where this missile came from, who fired it.
Yes, and Rishi Sunak has been very careful not to jump to immediate sort of statements and conclusions about this. And very, I think, tellingly, the Ministry of Defence this morning, they gave out regular updates of what the situation is in Ukraine. We think that the G20 press conference about...
Actually, Rishi Sunak's making that speech in the G20.
Russian Foreign Minister with the illegality and brutality of his country's war in Ukraine. Barely 12 hours later, more than 80 Russian missiles rained down on western Ukraine, killing civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure. While other world leaders were working together to tackle the greatest challenges our people face, Putin was launching indiscriminate attacks on civilians in Ukraine. In the wake of these attacks, today we held an urgent meeting of allies to underscore our solidarity with Ukraine and Poland. I also spoke to Polish President Duda this morning to offer my wholehearted support and assurance that the United Kingdom stands steadfastly behind him and his people at this worrying time. We should all be clear, none of this would be happening if it weren't for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the cruel and unrelenting reality of Putin's war. As long as it goes on, it poses a threat to our security and that of our allies. And as long as it goes on, it will continue to devastate the global economy. 2/3 of G20 members are currently experiencing inflation rates over 7%. And the IMF predicts 1/3 of the world's economy will be in recession this year or next. At a time when countries are tentatively emerging from the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic, households across the world have been hit by punishing price rises and are facing an uncertain future. When the G20 was established, it was with the acknowledgement that economic shocks are inherently global. Responding to them requires coordination and cooperation between the world's largest economies. We have come together over the years, despite our political differences, in recognition of the economic importance of this forum. But this year in particular, as last night's events laid bare, the challenges we face are utterly political. The persistent threat to our security and global economic asphyxiation has been driven by the actions of the one man unwilling to be at this summit, Vladimir Putin. There is not a single person in the world who hasn't felt the impact of Putin's war. Global food markets have been severely disrupted by his attempts to choke off Ukrainian grain supply. There has been an 8-fold increase in global energy prices thanks to Russia turning off their gas taps. And the economic aftershocks of Putin's casual disregard for human life will ripple around the world for years to come. But in Indonesia this week, the rest of the G20 have refused to let Russia's grandstanding and hollow excuse-making undermine this important opportunity to make life easier for our people. Economic stability and confidence are at the heart of the government's agenda. That means being a constructive and reliable member to the international community, using our influence to help keep global prices down and create the conditions that will help the United Kingdom and other global economies return to growth. At this summit, G20 partners have come together to strengthen our international economic foundations, making ambitious commitments to help the most vulnerable, reduce global reliance on Russian fossil fuels in favour of greener, more secure alternatives, and drive a better future where no country has the power to devastate the global economy. I'd like to thank the Indonesian President Jokowi for the role he has played in hosting these discussions and leading the G20 at this challenging time. Tomorrow, the Chancellor will build on these international foundations when he makes the autumn statement, outlining his plan to get the country on a positive trajectory, put the public finances on the right footing, and get debt falling. By promoting free markets, forging strong international relationships, and prioritising our stability and security, we will build a global platform for the United Kingdom to thrive, giving the people of our country the certainty that they need. Thank you. We'll take some questions from the press, I think starting with Chris from the BBC. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. To be clear, are you disputing what we've heard from President Biden? He said it's unlikely that the explosion in Poland was caused by a missile that was fired from Russia. And your UK intelligence reports are saying what you've heard from them. And if I may, what do you say to people today seeing this news who are deeply worried that a moment like this, even if not this particular incident...
if you are just tuning in, the Prime Minister taking questions from the press after his...
Thank you, Chris. Well, this is something that we discussed this morning at our meeting of allies, and I think what we all agreed this morning was that it was important for our teams to establish the facts, and that is exactly what is happening as we speak. There are teams on the ground involving not just the Poles, but also the Ukrainians, Americans and others. I think all of us want to get to the bottom of what happened, and it's right that we let that process conclude. But to your second point, and taking a step back, the reason we're even having this conversation is because yesterday Russia rained down over 80 missile strikes on the Ukrainians, on civilian infrastructure, electricity, water and such like. That's why we're having this conversation, and we can't lose sight of that fact. But we will get to the bottom of what happened, and that's what the teams are doing as we speak. Anushka, ITV.
Prime Minister, when you awoke...
OK, right, if you are just tuning in then, that is Prime Minister Sunak giving his keynote address as the G20 in Bali draws to a close. They issued their joint communique a little bit earlier, and during that speech he talked about the cruel and unrelenting reality of Putin's war. He talked about economic shocks being inherently global. He talked about the casual disregard of Putin for human life and how the G20 refused to accept Putin's grandstanding. Let's get some analysis from all of this from Mark White, where we still keep an eye on what is happening in Bali. And if we do get an update from him, I know Darren McCaffrey is among those journalists, we will cross back to it. But in the meantime, Mark, really interesting to hear a very robust speech there from the Prime Minister.
Yeah, we were saying before, I think the upshot of what has happened, regardless of where this particular missile came from, will be to galvanise support behind Ukraine. We heard the very first remarks there from Rishi Sunak saying, you know, while most G20 leaders were there in Bali trying to solve some of the world's problems, you had Vladimir Putin indiscriminately attacking civilians across Ukraine. And this is the real-world consequence of some 80 missiles raining down on towns and cities right across that country. And we know, of course, that the Ukrainians have been calling for many months now for better air defence systems, for fighter jets to help them defend their skies. It may well be that there is a push now by NATO countries to give them more of what they want, because at the end of the day, if this was a Russian-built missile but owned by the Ukrainians, it's potentially Soviet era, it's not going to be, you know, as sophisticated as a lot of the NATO weapons systems. And NATO weapons systems perhaps might be able to prevent the kind of mishap you see happening in Poland there, more effective over a longer range, more ability to target properly what's coming across. And I think as well, we heard from Rishi Sunak there about how they're full square behind Poland at this point. It may be, and we haven't really heard what Poland wants to happen.
Yeah.
But I would imagine it's not a leap to suggest that Poland will ask NATO for some help to shore up the defences on its borders as well, with the likes of better air defence systems to be able to help them should stream missiles come across again.
Yeah, and that investigation ongoing throughout the day here in Poland.
I think, again, that cautious approach was what we were really hearing from Rishi Sunak there, being very careful to say, look, our teams are investigating. We want to get to the bottom of where exactly this missile came from. But as I say, regardless of whether it was Russian-fired or Ukrainian-fired, it's still a consequence of the war that's raging in Ukraine. And I think it will only stiffen resolve to ensure that Ukraine is given as much support as it needs to try to help it win this war.
Moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC. You get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
OK, it's that time in the programme. We're going through the papers. We're joined by the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor, and the CEO of the Diana Awards, Tessie Ojo. Welcome back to both of you. Gosh, it's been quite a fast-paced morning, hasn't it? And the Prime Minister, we believe, still on his feet in Bali, talking about the Australian trade deal at the moment, taking questions on that. And as I say, our ears are still listening in to that. What was your assessment of how he handled that so far?
I thought he was very calm. He's got a good speaking voice, and, pleasant accent. I think he looked good.
Yeah. And what about what he was saying? I mean, he was very condemnatory of Putin.
It wasn't that difficult to know what he was going to say, but rightly he said it. Look, at the end of the day, if 12 months ago we'd had a discussion looking ahead, who would have imagined that we'd be in this situation with Putin, who is a ruthless man, an evil man, actually. I think he doesn't care how many people he kills or maims or how much destruction he wreaks upon people's lives. He's a dreadful, dreadful, awful human being.
Yeah. I think he was right that actually the Prime Minister reminded us that we're here because of one person. It's one person's action that's led us here. Yeah. And I think I love that he reminded us all of that fact.
Yeah. And that investigation ongoing by the Polish authorities into exactly who fired that missile. We'll keep you across that investigation here on GB News. But in the meantime, Tessie, page 15 of the newspaper. I always dreamed of having another child, but I can't afford it. What's this all about?
This is really, I think, another demonstration of the cost of living crisis. And we firstly, it's about parents or potential parents who are really looking at their budgets and saying we cannot afford to, we have to put our plans for parenting on hold, or if we wanted to expand our families, we just cannot do that because of the cost of childcare. And I think that whilst this might look like a personal choice, I think that there are three things that are really important here. Firstly is that we are an aging population. Like at the minute, statistics show that about 22% of the population will be 65 and older. Therefore, it's so necessary that we create a new generation. And
is it, though, 8 billionth baby was born yesterday? Global population showing its age as experts hail triumph of development. But, I mean, we're overcrowded.
Well, that's across the world. But we're also an ageing population. We're living much longer, which means we need to pay for that old age. We need to pay pensions. We need all of that. And I think if we don't have that next generation coming through, then that's a huge problem. I think the other part of this is that parents we're losing people in the workforce because people are saying we cannot afford to have two parents at work because of the cost of childcare. People are now thinking about, well, one person stays at home. And that has an implication for workforce.
Yeah. This is what they call supply side, one of the supply side reforms, isn't it, David?
Yeah, but I think that it's always been the case. I mean, look, there are plenty of irresponsible people who have children without a second thought. Other people think about it. I mean, within our own family, one of my sons has got 2 grandchildren I absolutely dote on.
Your son, I thought you said your son had 2 grandchildren.
No, sorry,
I was thinking, that's
children,
good work.
2 children. It's getting difficult. I'm getting old. No, 2 children. And, they would love a third, but are not sure whether, they can afford it now. He's got a very good job and all the rest of it. And I think that we just have to accept it does no harm for people to think about whether they want another child. It's different if you're looking for your first child, and if they decide they don't want another child, that's not an irresponsible decision. It's often an irresponsible decision to have another child without thinking about it.
Given this 8 billionth baby has been born, do you know what number you were?
I dread to think. But, everybody goes on about global warming, and I'm not, anybody who's critical of that. But what about global overpopulation? That never gets much of a look in.
That was what I was trying to say.
Isn't that we live in a world that adjusts itself anyway? When we have, you have new people coming through and you have other people leaving. So in some sense, it kind of adjusts itself. I suppose where I feel like where we have a problem is having this aging population, and where it's great that we're living longer, it's great that we have better lifestyles, but it's not great when we are losing our young.
No. It's an ageing population in this country and in the West, which obviously means, like you said, you've got more old people to pay for, to care for, and fewer working age people to pay for it.
Bad for GDP.
It's bad for GDP. But we do live in a world where Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, is in a reality TV show. And you want to talk about that, page 7 of the Telegraph.
Yes, page 7 of the Telegraph is some reflections by Catherine Stone, soon to retire Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. She's obviously had a lot of complaints about Matt Hancock. I can understand that. But what I feel a bit sort of troubled about is her regretting that she doesn't have the power to do anything about it. Because, you see, one of the few good things about members of Parliament is they take a decision and then they're held directly accountable for it. In other words, if Matt Hancock stands for Parliament again, and if a lot of his constituents are genuinely hacked off by him going into the jungle, they can refuse to vote for him. And I don't think it needs, some apparatchik to start smiting him down because, he chose to eat kangaroo testicles in the jungle rather than, I was going to say, not eating kangaroo testicles back home. Whatever you eat is the equivalent in Suffolk of kangaroo testicles.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I know what I was going to say on that. It suddenly occurred to me, we're all so conscious of animals. Don't you think people should be objecting to the humiliation inflicted on poor beasts by eating their...
It has been addressed. I think it's all RSPCA or Australian equivalent approved.
Yeah, and the cockroaches are happy and living a very...
No cockroach has died in the preparation of this.
But David, I was interested you chose this story because actually the first thing you said to me when I saw you this morning is, have you seen people fancy Matt Hancock now?
Yes. I was asking if it was you. There's a Daily Mail. Apparently, Matt Hancock is becoming an unlikely... So, look, come on, you can admit it. There's nobody watching. What is your feelings about Matt Hancock?
Well, I beg to differ on 2 points there. First, plenty of people watching and listening, but also I can't
I'm trying to lull you into a sense of false security.
I'm not falling for it. Katie Hines of the Daily Mail must have very different taste to me. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, I think that's a very nice way of putting it.
I
have been watching it, and I'm quite, I think for the last couple of days where he wasn't voted to do the trials, I thought that gives other people... Because on one hand, I can see why he's constantly been voted for some form of punishment or whatever, but also it's a show that has other people, and you're just not...
They're getting a free ride. But apparently somebody was saying... Sorry, I shouldn't be interrupted, but... I watch The Crown, even if I don't always approve of it. I'm a bit of a Crown addict.
Me too.
I've not watched a single minute of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. But apparently it has... this may be a spurious statistic. I read in the paper, it might nevertheless be true, that 5 times the audience for I'm a Celebrity than they get for The Crown.
Wow, so it's very popular. Well, I was sitting next to Boy George's agent at a do on Monday night. He was fuming with Matt Hancock because Boy George wasn't getting enough airtime, although that has since changed. But it isn't interesting how all these big celebrities have been trumped by the non-celebrity.
But Boy George ought to be able to, he's a showman. He ought to be able to sort of deal with that.
Well, he was going into a meditative trance, wasn't he, to cope with a lot of the creepy crawlies. Anyway, it's all entertaining.
Tessie, front page of the Mail, universities told to decolonise maths and computing. What does that mean?
This is an interesting story, and I think on the first hand, when you look at it, it feels like, universities have been told to go work. And that's not actually what the story says. The story is actually saying we need to be truthful about our past. We cannot have institutions like academic places like universities without actually teaching our past, without helping people understand what contributed to the society that we have now, and if we're going to build back better, what does that look like? If we're not teaching intellectuals the basics, for example, you couldn't possibly be studying Asian history and not study about Britain's colonial past. That's wrong.
Yeah.
There's something fundamentally wrong about that.
But this is about subjects as far and wide as computing. I mean, you could understand it in a topic about classics, but what's computing?
Let me tell you about computing. Do you remember in 2020 when in the first time we had lockdown and we had GCSE's results done by algorithms?
Yeah.
What happened? Children, when we're giving grades based on their postcodes, that's because our postcode systems in this country tells if you're rich or poor. Our postcode systems tells us that if you live in this certain postcodes, the prediction of schools in that area means that the kids would not perform well. That's fundamentally flawed. And based on that, children were allocated GCSE grades, which was just completely out of sync what they were predicted for. And that's part of how we redress. That tells us that the algorithms that sets up in our country is flawed, and we need to redress this. So teaching computing around how do we actually create systems that are fairer, I applaud this, and I really feel like it's the right move going forward.
Tessie applauds that. I mean, do you think that all of the poverty, the postcode discrepancies up and down the country in terms of algorithms is necessarily attributable to colonisation around the world, or do you think that as often been born out white British boys often do very well, very poorly doing exams?
I couldn't agree more. But I don't have anything profound to say on this.
All right, okay. Let's move on then to something much more profound, which is, I know, Tessie, you wanted to bring this in, but I think we've all got an opinion on this. The front page of the Times, egg rationing means a not-so-full English.
Yes, so this week we have had shortages of eggs across our stores, which is, for an egg lover like me, it's a crisis. It's a personal crisis. But I think that retailers and hospitality are really struggling with egg supplies the last week, and it's been contributed. It says that because of the avian flu outbreak that's killed millions of hens, leading to a 9.6% drop in egg production.
So you've basically got to ration your eggs.
You do.
You've got to make them last longer.
Yeah.
You do.
Well, it gives a whole new twist to throwing eggs at the king is an extra level of criminality if there's a shortage of them. You can't be wasting them like that.
100%.
Yeah.
I would.
But don't you think there are some stories that are largely inventions? I mean, as I insist on telling you, I do the supermarket shopping in our household.
You hear it.
I've been shopping in two quite distinct parts of the world.
You haunt
the
the
last few
shops.
days in Dorset. I haunt them, yes. Don't you touch those eggs, they're mine. But basically, I've not found any shortage of eggs anywhere.
Right. Okay.
And I am an egg eater, as indeed...
Final question, can you have a full English without any
Yes
sort of
or
egg?
no?
in it?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. There we go. We've got to leave it there.
No.
I have to have
You're
eggs.
looking disgusted.
I don't know.
egg lover.
Tessie and David, sorry to cut you short, but we do have to wrap. We're going to have more on the latest from the situation in Poland after this.
Hello, good morning. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A brighter start for many of us compared with yesterday morning. Some sunshine out there, but further showers are pushing in from the south and the west, and there'll be a more prolonged spell of rain, along with strengthening winds later. This feature running in from the southwest is on its way. Ahead of that, it's a case of sunshine and showers for many. The showers mostly affecting southern and western coasts first thing. Quite frequent, actually, along the south coast of England, where there's a gusty breeze. But inland, especially across central and eastern parts of the country, decent spells of sunshine through the morning and mostly dry as well. That is except for the Northern Isles, where it stays wet and windy. Gales or even severe gale force winds, with those winds peaking later in the day. Now, later on, there will be some wet weather arriving, but ahead of that, temperatures reaching 10 to 14 Celsius. But it's by the end of the afternoon that southwest England and then into South Wales, the heavy rain moves through. This rain will last for a few hours. It will push into southeast England with some intense downpours here, and we've seen some wet weather here recently, so a rain warning in force because it could cause issues overnight. It'll be accompanied by a strong wind, that wind gusty and leading to gales around coasts, but all in all, it's a blustery night for many. The rain pushes north, followed by showers, and so for most, it is a damp and breezy start to Thursday. That is except for the far west of Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we see some early sunshine, perhaps a few mist patches as well. And actually, Northern Ireland, once again, the place to be with plenty of sunshine through the day. Southwest England sees sunny skies reappear, as well as for northwest Scotland. But for many other places, it's cloudy, it's breezy, and there'll be outbreaks of rain or showers, the more persistent wet weather for northeast England and parts of southeast Scotland. Friday, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers once again, most of the showers towards the north and the west. Saturday starts off fine, but there'll be more wind and rain later.
Hello there, it's Eamonn Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own news from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Rishi Sunak says the threat to global security is driven by the actions of Vladimir Putin.
good morning. It's 9 o'clock. It's Wednesday, the 16th of November. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Paul.
Your top story this morning, Rishi Sunak saying that Vladimir Putin alone is driving global instability. Speaking at the end of the G20 summit in Bali in the past half an hour, the PM said the UK stands steadfastly behind Poland after a missile killed 2 people there.
Also this morning,
I'm tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Trump has announced his bid for the presidency in 2024, saying in a speech he wants to make America great and glorious again.
Rishi Sunak, meanwhile, has urged officials with concerns about the behaviour of Dominic Raab to come forward. It follows a series of bullying accusations against the Deputy Prime Minister.
And the Artemis rocket has taken off from Cape Canaveral. The historic NASA mission aims to send people back to the moon for the first time in 50 years.
Remember, you can drop us a line, get involved with the conversations we're having this morning, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
So, good morning. Our top story this morning, the Prime Minister has just addressed the G20 summit in Bali.
The Prime Minister warned that the economic and security crisis would not end unless the war in Ukraine ended.
He also reiterated his support for Poland after a missile killed 2 civilians there last night. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
In the wake of these attacks, today we held an urgent meeting of allies to underscore our solidarity with Ukraine and Poland. I also spoke to Polish President Duda this morning to offer my wholehearted support and assurance that the United Kingdom stands steadfastly behind him and his people at this worrying time. None of this would be happening if it weren't for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the cruel and unrelenting reality of Putin's war. As long as it goes on, it poses a threat to our security and that of our allies. And as long as it goes on, it will continue to devastate the global economy.
Well, let's speak now to the Shadow Secretary for Work and Pensions, Jonathan Ashworth. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your time. There's lots to talk to you about. Just very quickly, your reaction to events overnight in Poland and how Rishi Sunak has dealt with it this morning.
Well, deeply, deeply concerning, and of course our condolences to those who have lost their life in Poland. Poland remains a strong ally of the United Kingdom and a friend, and our bonds of friendship are very deep and strong with Poland, going back many, many years. I don't want to speculate on what has gone on. We need our NATO allies to properly investigate what has gone on. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, we're in this situation because of Russia's completely unacceptable invasion of Ukraine, and we restate again our solidarity and our support for Ukraine, and that support for Ukraine will continue and will be, it remains undiminished.
And under a Labour administration, what sort of defence spending would you bring in? Because there have just been 5 new frigate ships announced by Prime Minister Sunak in recent days. Continued investment in the armed forces in the face of those threats. Would you be sharing those?
Well, of course, it's a live question, because for under 12 years of the Conservatives, they've actually cut the numbers in our armed forces, of course. Look, we will make our spending commitments for the next Labour government in our manifesto as we get closer to a general election. The general election could be 2 years away, but we would always say our first priority is defence of the realm. We are the party that will stand up for national security in this country, and we would never do anything to undermine our national security. We want to strengthen our national security, but we'll make our specific recommendations or our specific policy commitments on expenditure closer to a general election.
OK, obviously with inflation rising again in September, up 1%, 11.1%, I believe. Those kind of commitments, very easy to make but difficult to deliver on, when in terms of inflation it often would mean a real terms cut. It's very easy in opposition to make those kinds of pledges.
Yes, we're in a very difficult economic climate, and of course that's the headline figure. When you look into the details, food and drink has risen 16% year on year. Inflation hurts the poor, it diminishes the purchasing power of wages, it undermines the value of the pension, and we're less able to weather these economic storms because of 12 years of lacklustre economic performance under the Conservatives, and of course because of that absolutely disastrous budget from the Conservatives 8 weeks ago, which led to a huge spike in borrowing costs. It led to a run on pension funds and people's mortgages increasing. So, look, we're going to see a budget tomorrow. I hope in that budget we see the value of the pension increase honoured. The triple lock for the pensioners should be honoured. And I hope we don't see cuts for the payments, the universal credit payments for working people and disabled people, because they should not pay the price because of the disastrous decisions and the economic mismanagement of the Conservatives.
And looking ahead to PMQs later today, the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab will be standing in for Rishi Sunak, and he'll be taking questions, I think, from Angela Rayner across the dispatch box. And one thinks that the allegations of bullying against Dominic Raab may be raised, but the issue of bullying in Parliament is one that both parties are facing, given that John Bercow, who's still a member of the Labour Party, is still facing an internal party investigation 8 months on after an independent inquiry labelled him a serial bully.
Yeah, but John Bercow has not been appointed by Keir Starmer to his shadow cabinet. In fact, John Bercow isn't even an MP. Dominic Raab has been appointed by Rishi Sunak. Last week we had the Gavin Williamson furore, who was appointed by Rishi Sunak and then had to resign. Of course, the week before, serious question marks about Suella Braverman as well. In the end, this comes down to Rishi Sunak's judgment and his weakness in that he has to pander to certain factions amongst Conservative MPs. And I think the worry is that when we're facing the crises, the international crisis in Ukraine, when we're facing the global economic issues and the economic problems that the Conservatives have created here, I think we have a very weak Prime Minister, which is exemplified by the way in which he's made these appointments of people for whom now there are serious question marks.
Jonathan, appreciate you taking the time to speak to us from our Westminster studio there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, joining us now for the latest analysis is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Welcome back, Mark. Look, we've been analysing that speech from the Prime Minister at the close of the G20 summit in Bali. And, you know, you could have sort of predicted what he was going to say, but still very robust.
Yes, I think so. At the end of the day, he's obviously urging caution. The British government and the security officials here in this country are in the process now of trying to establish exactly where this missile came from. And it may well be, and indications are certainly pointing to that, with the Associated Press quoting unnamed senior security sources in the United States, suggesting that it may have been a Ukrainian missile trying to shoot down a Russian missile. But this is a real-world consequence of Russia launching 80-plus missiles into Ukraine, targeting civilian infrastructure and civilian areas in Ukraine throughout yesterday, largely seen as a snub to G20 leaders at the time where they were meeting to try to solve many of the world's problems. Vladimir Putin, of course, didn't attend the G20, sent Sergei Lavrov instead and a few officials. And I think it will stiffen the resolve of NATO members, really, to, of course, support Poland and perhaps provide new systems to help bolster the defences in the Polish border, but also probably give Ukraine much more of the air defences that they've been calling for some time now. They want these sophisticated NATO weapon systems that are much more accurate, that will help them protect themselves against this barrage of missiles from Russia.
So given all that, Rishi Sunak saying that we need to establish all the facts first, does that really matter, the facts, given the big picture?
At the end of the day, I think it will be roughly the same upshot. If it was a Russian missile or a Ukrainian missile, we're not going to go to war with Russia if they've accidentally put a missile even into a NATO member's soil. But that would result in there being much more support for Ukraine and that NATO member. I think we're going to get that anyway, even if it was a Ukrainian mistake. In trying to target a Russian missile and it's gone astray.
I just want to put you on the spot a little bit, just in relation to some breaking news that's just coming through in the last few moments. This from the Associated Press newswire. They're reporting this morning that an oil tanker off the coast of Oman has been struck by a bomb-carrying drone amid heightened tensions with Iran. But this is significant, isn't it? Of course, with the World Cup and Qatar just in that whole area. Lots of details still to come out, but I understand the oil tanker is owned or allegedly owned by an Israeli billionaire. What do you make of all of this?
Well, this really just indicates how unstable many parts of the world are at the moment. We know around this area and around the Gulf, there is very significant problems, issues from time to time with tankers and other vessels in that area being targeted. Vessels in that area. That's why we have a very significant Royal Navy presence in the Gulf and probably more assets heading to that area. We've got the HMS Queen Elizabeth Carrier Strike Group that is on active patrol at the moment. It's on patrol in Northern Europe, but, you know, it's perfectly possible that they could be retasked to deal with issues such as flashpoints like this. But it goes, you were mentioning or asking Jonathan Ashworth about defence spending. This is really a hot button issue because you've got such a high rate of inflation. If there is not a significant boost in defence spending, then you're talking about a real terms defence cut at a time when the defence budget over successive years has been hollowed out. We got the announcement yesterday of the fact that the 5 additional Type 26 frigates will now be built on the Clyde. Yes, they're needed, but actually more in the way of defence spending is needed. Labour know that. They were the ones that actually commissioned the aircraft carriers, HMS Queen Elizabeth and the HMS Prince of Wales in the first place. All governments, I think, in this country realise that we need to have a robust defence, but when you've got competing interests like an economy that's tanking at the moment, it's very difficult for them to make those decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Mark, good to talk to you. Thank you for that analysis.
Thank you very
that's Mark White, our Home and Security editor, and there'll be more on that with Tom Harwood in the briefing at 9:30, and then after that, it's Bev Turner at 10 a.m. with Bev Turner Today. Bev, what have you got?
Morning, guys. Yeah, we're going to be carrying on the story that you were just talking about. We're going to have the latest on the Ukraine conflict spilling over into Poland. We're hoping to take a live NATO press conference during the show. We're going to be doing some budget build-up with Liam Halligan as well, of course, for tomorrow. We've got a panel of Maggie Oliver, Ben Habib and Joanna Williams covering stories, including one that the fact that only a fifth of children never returned to the classroom after lockdown, and a Twitter poll on whether Donald Trump running again is a good idea.
Where have all those kids gone? Bev Turner, thank you very much indeed. Stay with us after the break. Andrew Pearce will be here giving us his take on the big news stories of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel. Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. We're discussing the big stories of the day with the consultant editor and my co-presenter
Yes.
on a Thursday, the lovely Andrew Pearce. Welcome to the programme. First of all, what a G20 it has been, and I'm not talking about the tropical rain. It's been quite a baptism of fire for Rishi Sunak on the international stage.
Absolutely, and I noticed he managed to get himself right next to President Biden in that roundtable discussion where they're talking about the missile going into Poland. Yeah, he's seeing every leader he can. Talk now that from this we could even get a trade deal with India. I think Rishi's doing quite well out there, actually.
Yeah.
He performs well. He's not Boris, of course, but I think he's doing pretty well. And extraordinary. Why I was suspicious about this idea that Russia has launched a rocket into Poland. Would they really do it while during G20 when the world's leaders are all gathered together and can agree a very quick, concerted package of action? I really hope we're right that it is Ukraine trying to take down a Russian missile. And it landed
Still
in
sounds
Poland.
as though a Russian missile was sailing pretty close to the border.
But actually as well, though, Isabel, this is overshadowing the fact that Russia yesterday launched its most intense military missile bombardment of Ukraine since the war began.
Yeah.
And that's causing much more damage, significant damage.
Yeah, you were saying that Rishi Sunak doing well, you thought, at G20, but he's dodged a bullet not having to meet Xi Jinping this morning, which causes some problems for his backbenchers.
Yeah, because a lot of them want us to be much more aggressive with China, so we should be. David Cameron, of course, and George Osborne were all over the Chinese like a rash. Do you remember he took him to the pub in Chequers and made him drink a pint of bitter? And Chinese relations still improved despite drink, because I've been in that pub. So there is a lot of hostility to China, not least because of what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims. Effectively, it's a form of genocide. So yeah, he has dodged a bullet, actually. And that's what diplomacy is all about.
That first bilateral between President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak happened this morning, and it seems as though, compared to the relationship, I think the Biden administration sometimes found Boris a bit chaotic. They certainly found his trust totally economically divergent. Yeah, they couldn't communicate there. They've seemed to have got on pretty well in that first bilat.
I think so, and it probably helps that President Biden got his name right this time, because of course he didn't last time.
Is it small things?
Sunak.
I know, poor old Biden.
No, Sunak.
Sunak, that's right.
Mr. Sunak.
Biden is a joke, isn't he? A shambling wreck of a man, the leader of the free world. And of course, we've seen Trump. The return of never really went away, did he? Unrepentant. He's going to run for it. I don't think he's going to get it, but. Do the Democrats then stick with Biden? Because Biden beat him good and proper last time. 7 million votes difference, biggest vote poll ever for a Democratic candidate.
Well, this is the double-edged sword for the Democrats, which is that they've done well in the midterms. And those Democrats who didn't want Joe Biden to run in 2024 will feel that his position's now actually been strengthened by that result.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though I think, putting it politely, his cognitive powers are somewhat in decline. And they'll be even worse in 3 or 4 years' time. But he's going to feel emboldened now because he had the best midterm results for a president for years.
He's 80 on Sunday.
I know. And how do young people relate to that? They don't, do they? Of course they don't.
Well, they seemed to at the ballot box in the midterms, didn't they? As you say.
And it was a really powerful anti-Trump vote. in my view. And, of course, he even lost his potential running mate in Arizona. She was supposed to win Arizona for the Republicans, and she lost. The Democrats got it. So, but you wouldn't believe it with Trump. He's got so much chutzpah, hasn't he? He's going to make America great again. I didn't notice him making it great last time.
Well, Ron DeSantis is going to be his big problem, isn't he, between now and 2024? He's a younger man, so he's got that on his side. But the sort of consensus we seem to be getting from Republicans that we've spoken to this morning is whether or not it is Trump, the Trump style, the Trump sort of attack mode seems to be aped by the other candidates, and whether or not it is Trump himself, we're going to see echoes of him in whoever goes through to the White House next for the Republicans.
I'm sure that's right, but I'm sure Republicans will look at how well DeSantis did in Florida. I mean, that was a huge victory. Massive. And he's telegenic, he's attractive, he's got a clever, attractive wife, nice kids. It all counts. But what's the other thing I thought, though, about Trump? There was Melania there. How many of us speculated on air that she'd be gone the week after they left the White House? No. She's still there with him. She must love the awful man.
Well, do you know, politics aside, and it's terrible to get into it, but I do think she's the best-dressed First Lady they've ever had since Jackie Kennedy.
By a country mile.
I'm so glad you agree.
No, I do. And she never put a foot wrong as First Lady. Whereas Michelle Obama got into various controversies. Hillary Clinton certainly did when she was the First Lady. She hardly graced any of the big front-cover magazines because they almost punished her because she's married to Donald Trump.
But it's interesting in all of this, and I know I can almost hear your disapproval of us talking about this, but Carol Biden, incredibly important in propping up President Biden at the moment, and believed to be not pulling the strings, because that sounds disrespectful.
No, I think she's running the show.
She's running the show.
She's running the show. Dr. Biden. And she looks great too.
Yeah, she does.
And she's devoted to her husband, and she sort of tries to keep him... guide him as much as she can. But I think it makes American politics fascinating again. Trump, I mean, could we really see Trump and Biden all over again?
Well, I always think, if you did see that, what does that say about democracy?
I know. How a country of 330 million people can't come up with a better choice than that, than a man who's bordering on early onset dementia and a rotten old bigot like Donald Trump.
Well, silly politicians, who'd have thought? Well, we've got Matt Hancock in the jungle. Really quickly, we've only got 30 seconds left, but it turns out somebody in your paper, your showbiz writer, has got a bit of a guilty crush on him.
She's written in the paper today, Katie Hine, who's a fine woman, that she has got a crush on him. She thinks he's rather buff and rather hot, to which I tweeted, I have made her an urgent appointment at Moorfields Eye Hospital.
Thank God.
Because she clearly needs help. I've known Matt for 20 years. He ain't attractive. Doesn't do it for me, anyway.
Well, on that note,
Andrew
Pierce, I look forward to seeing you bright and early tomorrow morning for lots more of that mischief and all of your insights as well. For us, though, that's it. You're going to be off to Qatar, aren't you, this weekend, Friday?
Yeah, there's something happening in Qatar, so I'll tell you all about it on Sunday. But coming up next, stand by for Tom Harwood with the bearded briefing.
Hello, good morning. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A brighter start for many of us compared with yesterday morning. Some sunshine out there, but further showers are pushing in from the south and the west, and there'll be a more prolonged spell of rain, along with strengthening winds later. This feature running in from the southwest is on its way. Ahead of that, it's a case of sunshine and showers for many. The showers mostly affecting southern and western coasts first thing. Quite frequent, actually, along the south coast of England, where there's a gusty breeze. But inland, especially across central and eastern parts of the country, decent spells of sunshine through the morning and mostly dry as well. That is except for the Northern Isles, where it stays wet and windy. Gales or even severe gale force winds, with those winds peaking later in the day. Now, later on, there will be some wet weather arriving, but ahead of that, temperatures reaching 10 to 14 Celsius. But it's by the end of the afternoon that southwest England and then into South Wales, the heavy rain moves through. This rain will last for a few hours. It will push into southeast England with some intense downpours here. And we've seen some wet weather here recently, so a rain warning in force because it could cause issues overnight. It'll be accompanied by a strong wind, that wind gusty and leading to gales around coasts. But all in all, it's a blustery night for many. The rain pushes north, followed by showers. And so for most, it is a damp and breezy start to Thursday. That is except for the far west of Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we see some early sunshine, perhaps a few mist patches as well. And actually, Northern Ireland, once again, the place to be with plenty of sunshine through the day. Southwest England sees sunny skies reappear, as well as for northwest Scotland. But for many other places, it's cloudy, it's breezy, and there'll be outbreaks of rain or showers, the more persistent wet weather for northeast England and parts of southeast Scotland. Friday, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers once again, most of the showers towards the north and the west. Saturday starts off fine, but there'll be more wind and rain later.
The Chancellor has a problem. He's got £55 billion to find, and it could soon become your problem too. Tax rises and cuts could be coming, but where will the axe fall? Benefits and pensions, support for energy bills, or social care? To find out what it means for you and your family, the Chancellor's autumn statement, live here on GB News tomorrow from 10 a.m.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on